Reborn. Evolving from Nothing Chapters 201 to 210. Chapter 201 Meeting. Perfect Body. Stay on. Dorian kept the ability on, trying to use it as sparingly as possible. He was already tired and his energy stores were less than 2/3 full. Dorian's first thought was that his physical body, even without being enhanced by the power of law, was quite a bit stronger than he had thought. Thud. Dorian knocked the towering golem back several meters, sending it stumbling. His arm didn't shake at all as he pulled back, his eyes focused. It wasn't that the golem was weak. In fact, compared to the physical strength of the members of the demonic council, it was at least 2 to 3 times stronger. It was simply that here, without the power of law to enhance it further, Dorian was much, much stronger. His balanced demon form was arguably in the upper tier of all physical forms. It was a form that did not even exist before he created it, a freakishly powerful being that could rival dragons. While it might not be on the level of the truly powerful divine beasts, it was extremely strong, especially when boosted by his various abilities. The golem that was knocked back, however, got up almost immediately. Several large cracks could be seen in its metal armor, cracks that visibly healed in an instant, the damage Dorian had inflicted negated. Dorian frowned. He leapt forward and punched the golem again, smashing it backwards with a backhanded blow. The attack sent it slamming into one of the gold-plated pillars, bouncing off it in a wide spin as it hit the wall. It didn't leave any markings or damage on the wall or pillar, unlike his own direct attack from before. Once again, despite visible injuries, the golem got up. By the time it was fully standing, all the injuries had been completely restored, leaving it in a pristine state. When he smacked it backwards, he had checked to see if he could absorb it. Unfortunately, he couldn't. The golems seemed to be part of the unique type of creations that were separate from regular artifacts. They were closer to living beings than regular artifacts. Great Demon Disciple. The Guardian Knights must be bound to 15. If you can render him unconscious or kill him, they will automatically give up. Baron Radishow's voice echoed loudly as his reedy form blocked a massive punch from one of the towering golems. The blow sent the defensive-minded shade tumbling backwards, but left him otherwise uninjured. He is correct. Unless we can take out the controller, the Guardian Knights will keep on regenerating, no matter how much damage you do. He must have linked them up to some type of energy source he controls. Kandor, the expert on souls, chimed in as he ducked and weaved under a powerful punch from one golem. His arms blurred as he grabbed the arm of that golem and then shifted his weight, sending it hurling in the air like a judo expert. We will hold them off while you take down 15. Baron Radishow's voice boomed out as he jumped forward again, standing stalwart. Dorian quickly scanned the hall. The council members had entered into a stalemate with the golems. The experience and skill of the masters of the council had given them a large upper hand, but the physique of the golems neutralized that. If they could access their laws or use magic, or even use specialized artifacts, they would have had a much easier time. As it was, they had fallen into a battle of attrition. Despite that, they had faith in Lord Obelisk and his demonic prowess, willing to fight off the golems and make it so that he could charge through. SHHKKKK. Boom. A loud noise distracted everyone. The doorway that they had all passed through had somehow slammed shut, a magical barrier of some sort appearing out of nowhere. This barrier looked like it was made of pure black stone, but also crackled slightly with energy. "Hello? I thought you said there was nothing else here?" The speaker this time was Priscilla, her outraged voice echoing in the air as she brought out a pair of steel fans, slicing into the golem that was attacking her. "There was nothing when I checked. This trap looks to have appeared out of thin air." Hallow's voice was edged with anger as he whipped out the sword at his waist. SHKKK. He directly cut the attacking golem in half, splitting it. Blue energy crackled off his gauntlets, his mask faintly glowing. Whoosh! The golem magically reformed itself, twisting to continue attacking the powerful demonic shade. None of the shades were able to move as freely as Dorian was. If they gave up more than a split second of their focus, the attacking golems would rip them apart. That's not possible. The laws don't work here. I bloody well know that. I don't know how it works, but it clearly does. The two bickered, the majority of their attention now focused simply on survival. Damn, what a unique trap. If it had only been the members of the demonic council in here, it probably would have worked with ease. To hide something so effectively that it couldn't be detected by even the alert masters of the demonic council, even without access to their laws, was a notable achievement. Dorian's eyes flashed as he bashed aside his golem once again, yelling out loud. "I'll go ahead, stay strong while I'm gone." He didn't quite know what to make of the masters of the demonic council, but he didn't directly consider them enemies yet. He would at least try to save them, just for the help they had given him when it came to taking on 15. Without a second thought, he rushed forward towards the entrance of the throne room, leaving behind the members of the demonic council behind. The golem he had tossed away blazed after him, giving chase. The moment he touched the door, something unexpected happened. The door seemed to physically suck him into it. Instead of opening like he would expect a door to, the entire door itself shivered. Whoosh! Dorian blinked as he teleported, finding himself on the other side. "Hello, brother." A familiar voice echoed in the air as Dorian gathered his bearings. Dorian's guard was up as he blinked again, scanning where he had arrived at. "I made it to the throne room." The throne room, like the waiting room outside, had several large pillars supporting its roof, each one at least 3 meters wide and more than a dozen meters tall. These pillars were covered in black metal cages that looked vaguely familiar. The room was sparsely decorated, save for a long, black carpet that led up to the slightly raised throne. White, crystalline torches lit up the walls, giving the room a well-lit appearance. The throne itself was made of a harsh, black stone. It had a jagged, rough appearance, with little decoration. Dorian saw several long cracks and depressions in it, as if it had been handled rather roughly in the past. Sitting atop this throne was a gray-skinned, unassuming humanoid. 15. Dorian responded calmly, slightly surprised that he could make out the other anomaly. Clearly, 15 had decided to allow Dorian to see him, instead of phasing through reality and hiding. "What do you really want? Why are you here?" he asked, not expecting much of an answer. He stepped forward as he spoke, his eyes alert as he walked towards the throne. 15 surprised him, however, giving him a small smile as he responded. "This is the sealed prison that our father, the Thunder Saint, and the wise lady set up to help them kill the Demon Emperor, so many years ago. It's also the former throne room of the Demon Emperor." Dorian blinked, his eyes widening. "You already broke all of the sealing rods he left behind. I'm sure if you look around, you might feel some similarities." Dorian stood still, taking a closer look at the world around him. Specifically, at the 6 pillars that were supporting the roof, covered in black cages. He's right, they give off the same kind of feeling that the sealing tubes, or rods, or whatever, did. Dorian turned his attention back towards 15. "What is this all for? Why is it still active?" he asked slowly, surprised by 15's attitude. The anomaly seemed far more reasonable now than he had been before. "I don't know, I'm not omnipotent. The Demon Emperor is indeed dead, though, if that is what you're wondering. Father is nothing if not thorough. I couldn't even find a trace of the fallen Emperor, his body would have proved quite useful." Dorian took a few more steps forward. By this point, he had reached the end of the rug and was standing just a few meters away from the throne, in front of the raised platform. His entire body tensed up as he looked at the gray mantor. 15 smiled. "Thinking of attacking me, huh? It's useless." 15's body shivered. It then began to distort. His voice transformed, becoming one that echoed in the room from overhead. Dorian reacted by jumping forward, his body blurred as he smashed down where 15's distorted body was. The image exploded into a cloud of steam, the anomaly vanishing from his sight. He twisted his head to the left and right, trying to catch sight of him. He kept his perfect body ability active, not letting himself miss anything. Brother, 15's wavering voice echoed as he tutted. "This is a room that is not only sealed off from the presence of laws, but from space itself. The only entrance to it is a teleportation matrix set on the door you entered through, one that doesn't exist in this space. The throne, and the platform holding it, are merely connected to an illusion array where I am." His voice boomed. This was a trap that caught the Demon Emperor himself. While you may have weakened it by releasing the sealing rods, it is still more than enough to hold you and the foolish members of the demonic council. 15 sighed. "Oh, so that's it? All it does is hold us?" Dorian stepped off from the throne, his eyes peering around the room as he continued to scan for 15. "Doesn't sound that scary." He maintained a cavalier attitude as his heart pounded, ready to react to even the slightest hint of movement. The seals will drain your energy over time. You will be unconscious in just a few hours, dead in half a day. 15 returned, his voice supremely unconcerned. Dorian narrowed his eyes. Indeed, he could feel his energy stores being sapped, deep within his soul. He was roughly down to half energy already from all the combat he had been in. Think, Dorian, if this is a trap, there has to be a way to break out. As he realized all of this, he looked around the room for anything of note. All he could find were the 6 pillars that stood out in the open and the throne he was standing next to. I was never supposed to catch you up in this, brother. It was supposed to be a trap for the demonic council, but you just had to butt in. I had no choice but to act like I did. It would go against the persona I made to do otherwise. 15's voice contained a hint of genuine regret. Is that so, a persona? Despite the dire situation, Dorian smiled slightly, paying little attention to 15's words. The feeling of familiarity he sensed from those pillars, an idea formed in his mind. One that he grew more and more certain of as he began to walk towards them. Ah, brother, this was a trap that sealed the demon emperor himself at one point. Do you really think you stand a chance at breaking it? Even if you could affect those sealing rods, this is something on an entirely different level. 15 appeared to have some way to observe him, watching from afar. He sounded interested in Dorian's actions, watching him carefully. It doesn't sound like he can do anything to me while I'm in here. Dorian merely smiled and ignored 15 as he walked up to one of the pillars, slowly resting his hand on it. A small tidbit of energy shot off from his soul, interacting with it. This energy vibrated as it came into contact with the pillar. His soul itself then shook, his eyes faintly glowing. The pillar seemed to recognize several of the energy sources in his soul, the various imprints many of the demonic laws had left behind. In particular, Dorian could feel it resonate with the law of original sin. However, as it did all of this, Dorian's unique soul makeup interacted with the pillar as well. Just like with the sealing tubes, Dorian could also feel a sensation of familiarity. The pillar seemed to inherently recognize him and his soul. He was able to gain access to the pillar itself due to its recognition of the laws he used. His unique soul, one that was formed from part of Ukeli himself, changed that access, morphing it into something more direct. Something more controlled. Whoosh! Dorian blinked. He found himself looking at a rather recognizable sight. The world of Moria, covered in thousands of mountain-sized chains, peeling off into space. This time, however, Dorian was no longer a random onlooker from the ground. Instead, he was standing atop a floating yellow platform, hovering thousands of meters high in the air. Wind brushed against him lightly, but he didn't feel short on breath like he might expect so high up. Whoa! Dorian muttered as he saw this, feeling faintly disoriented. This view was jarringly different from what he expected, but the sensations were still close to the same. He couldn't pull on the pillar, but he felt that if he concentrated, he could cause hundreds of the chains to grow taut. Oh, a visitor? It's been quite some time since I had one of those. Dorian spun around as he heard someone speak, a voice that was quiet and peaceful, like that of a calm river. The speaker was a young man with spiky, bright blonde hair, dressed in an orange monk robe that was left open at the chest. His ears were pierced with 2 black studded diamonds, twinkling with light. A long, jagged tattoo of a lightning bolt marked his face, going from his forehead all the way across his right eye, down to his chin. Dorian's words failed him as he stared at the figure. The man's appearance, it was identical to that of someone else, someone he had read up on, long ago. Someone famed throughout the 30,000 worlds. One of the great heroes that had mysteriously vanished, long ago. Hi, my name is Kaladin. The man spoke up cheerfully, holding out a hand. But you might know me as the Thunder Saint. He grinned cheekily. Nice to meet you. Chapter 202 The Thunder Saint. You're the Thunder Saint? Dorian exclaimed out loud as he stared at the blonde-haired human, excitement overwhelming him. This was one of the legends of this world. A fantastic hero that fought against the mighty demon emperor of old. A literal fairy tale character. While Dorian hadn't grown up in this reality, and thus didn't see the man in the same light as most folk, he still found it amazing to meet an actual legend. Dorian paused slightly as he looked at the man. He could sense, instinctively, that the man in front of him truly was a human. It wasn't an illusion created by the array he was in, nor was it his mind playing tricks on him. He was actually speaking to Kaladin, the Thunder Saint. "Aren't you supposed to be something like a monk? Why do you have so much hair?" He spoke up, saying the first thing that came to mind. He internally rebuked himself right after, trying to think up a better question. "I was never good at being a monk. But hey, if at first you don't succeed, try again, right?" Kaladin smiled back. When he spoke and smiled, the long, lightning bolt tattoo scrunched up, making it look like it was striking down. Dorian frowned slightly. "Didn't you found an entire monastery full of monks?" He nodded at Kaladin. "I am a terrible role model." Kaladin shrugged. "But, you're the Thunder Saint. You're supposed to be famed for your dedication and bravery." Dorian felt like the stories he'd read about this particular great hero didn't seem quite so accurate. "Well, I suppose that does make me a great role model." Kaladin rubbed his chin. "I guess the two cancel out? That makes me a mediocre role model?" He pounded a hand on his chest, giving Dorian a full-toothed grin. "I have always strived for mediocrity. I'm not sure that's how any of that works." Dorian returned, stuttering. Don't worry about it, don't sweat the small stuff." Kaladin waved him off, seemingly unconcerned that his logic was completely flawed, instead digging into his own line of questioning. "Who might you be, young demon, if you don't mind me asking?" Oh, right. I'm Dorian, and, well, I'm not really a demon, but it's complicated." Dorian began. A few moments passed as Dorian gave the legendary hero a somewhat vague explanation. Despite feeling instinctively that this was indeed the legendary Thunder Saint, he kept his responses guarded and careful. He explained that he was here to unseal Moria and wipe out the dangerous demonic remnants that prowled about here. He also mentioned that his wife had her soul injured and he was trying to find medicine to help her recover. Oddly enough, Kaladin gave him an actual round of applause when he heard that, even tearing up. The supposed monk had none of the decorum Dorian would expect from a monk, but at this point, nothing would surprise him. Dorian kept his questions rather pointed, knowing that time was of the essence, to at least some degree. The demonic shades outside were locked in a stalemate with those golems. He had a few hours at most. Spending a few minutes getting some answers was a worthy endeavor. Kaladin seemed perfectly fine with answering, talking freely. There was a ton he wanted to ask the legendary Thunder Saint, but he needed to focus on his immediate needs first. This all is an enormous, interconnected array, constructed using the biggest remnants of the soul spell matrix of the Demon Emperor, to prevent him from resuscitating. Kaladin was currently explaining where they were right now, and what the sealing tubes functioned for. "I thought you all fully killed him at the final battle?" Dorian asked back, curious. Understanding the trap he was in was the first step to escaping it. "Well, yes and no. We definitely obliterated his body, largely thanks to you, Kelly, myself, and Arthur. We then harnessed the power of an entire world, drawing on every bit of energy from the laws we could manage to create this prison, all to seal away his soul spell matrix." "Why didn't you just destroy it?" Dorian replied, scratching his head. Kaladin gave him an amused look. "Do you think we didn't try?" He shook his head. The Demon Emperor was a freakish monster in his own right. He split his soul into multiple pieces right before he died, scattering them into the air through some type of mystical spell. While we managed to destroy his main body, large pieces of his soul still existed, hidden within the fabric of existence here on Moria. Such a thing was unheard of, unthinkable, even. Who would willingly split 7 pieces of their soul away? It was suicidal, but, then again, he was dying to us anyway. Kaladin then gestured at the world below. "It's part of why we chose to harness the power of this world, transforming it into a relatively lawless wasteland. We thought we might be able to starve out and obliterate the remnants of the Demon Emperor." "But," Dorian queried. "No buts. We did it. The Demon Emperor is most certainly dead, any remnant pieces of his soul stamped out. He may have been a powerful angelic class demon, but he was not a god." Kaladin smiled, this time a bit sadly. Pray few can outmarch the clutches of time. There was a quiet moment as Kaladin seemed to ponder something. Dorian waited patiently, but when it became clear that Kaladin could sit still there for hours or even days, he broke in with another question. "Well, then how did you end up here?" Kaladin looked up and sighed. The final battle was grueling. In the end, I was struck with an attack that rent my soul, very nearly killing me. The injury was likely to be fatal if I did not receive immediate treatment or rest for hundreds of years, which would kill me anyway from old age. I am not an immortal and the injury was very draining on my life force. He rubbed his chin lightly. Even the boost from my enhanced soul spell matrix couldn't make up for that. He shrugged. The Demon Emperor's attacks were incredibly strange and difficult to defend against, bypassing even the sturdiest of shields. Kaladin's voice became engaged as he went on, enjoying the opportunity to talk. Arthur and Sun Wukong left to fight off the High Generals as they rushed back to attack the castle, while Osra and Ukeli began constructing this enormous sealing array. It was eventually determined that the complexity of the array was too great. To seal an entire planet, it was something incredibly difficult to accomplish. There was no normal matrix genie that could maintain something of such scale. His eyes flashed. However, the soul of an angelic class monk like myself, on the other hand, it was something I could handle with ease, even in my near-death state. You sacrificed yourself? Dorian said slowly, his eyes wide. Kaladin eyed him, a small smile on his face. You don't understand the evils that the demons inflicted, Mr. Young Demon that claims to not be a demon. The Demon Emperor actually wasn't that bad a fellow, but he didn't control his subordinates and refused to keep them in line. Something had to be done. He sighed. If I could prevent a repeat of all that pain, all that suffering, yes, I would be willing to die for that. There is a reason I went on such a suicidal mission in the first place. He shook his head. The war was horrifying. Billions and billions of innocents were swept up in it, the constant slaughter, the destruction of entire planets. Anything was worth it to stop that unending war. And so here you are now. Dorian stared at Kaladin, without blinking. Indeed. Dorian stayed silent for a moment, taking the information in. His heart was tinged with genuine, heartfelt respect as he heard the man's tale firsthand. After that moment, he asked another question. You don't seem particularly in control of the array. He began slowly, waving his hand. In fact, I spoke to another array genie, one that was in control of a network of inheritances connected to this planet. He didn't mention you at all. Kaladin nodded as he heard this. Each of the sealing lances was placed at a spot where a remnant of the Demon Emperor's soul was detected. Eventually, the soul remnants would be absorbed into each sealing lance. The plan was for them to slowly dissipate. Unfortunately, he shrugged. Emperor Karsos was a wily bastard. He co-opted the sealing network we built to spread all the knowledge he had of his demonic laws, and created his own array network on top of ours. Over time, these two networks have merged somewhat, making a mess of everything. That array genie was his creation. Sealing lances? Tubes? Rods? Can no one pick out a single name for the damn things? Dorian tossed the thought from his mind as he continued to listen. It's because of that, though, that I've managed to get a few indirect messages out to some of my descendants in the monastery. Karsos was also able to send out rumors and information of his own, drawing demonic disciples here. Kaladin continued. Wait, does that mean you heard what happened to Ukeli? Dorian interjected. Oh, you know of that? Well, yes, I'm aware of how he went insane in the end, though only because of a few messages Osra sent me. I've already done everything I could to help her. He sighed. Still, all in all, living in here hasn't been that bad. Kaladin motioned with his hand. Immediately, a chair appeared, made out of what appeared to be crackling yellow energy. He sat down in the chair comfortably, turning to look back at Dorian. It is what it is, I can't change the past. He smiled. But, as Dorian went over all this, his eyes narrowed. Does that mean the Demon Emperor is still alive, in part? Just, somewhere in the array? Dorian replied, feeling confused. Kaladin laughed out loud. I already told you, he's dead. Even with only a few disassociated soul remnants left, the Demon Emperor truly was a great foe to face. But time is the one enemy that no one can truly defeat. He looked over towards Moria with a sad gleam in his eyes. Karsos faded into the nether several hundred years ago. The injuries he sustained by splitting his soul were not survivable. I only managed to survive so long by leeching off the array, having it slowly heal my soul. He frowned ever so slightly. I have been alone ever since. Dorian felt his heartstrings tug. Kaladin's experience reminded him of when he was trapped in his own soul spell matrix for years, time accelerated and forming a mental prison of sorts. He couldn't imagine how awful it would be to be trapped here for centuries. Well, how do we get out? Dorian took command as he began to walk around the floating disc, his eyes narrowing. Kaladin gave him a cheerful smile. You can't. There are tons of safeguards in place locking the area down. Both myself and the Demon Emperor tried for centuries to leave and failed. I'm just a soul, so escaping wouldn't do much for me, but it was fun to try. It's quite great to have company now, but I am sorry to have to bring forth such sad tidings. For the first time, Kaladin's unwavering optimism broke slightly as he gave Dorian a sympathetic look. Right. Dorian waved him off. But, hypothetically, if I wanted to get out, how would I do that? I'm a bit special when it comes to doing things I shouldn't be able to do. He turned a questioning eye upon Kaladin. The monk paused for a moment. Well, the first thing you'd need to do is be able to access the demonic array left by Karsos. You actually stand a chance of that, given your demonic nature. Kaladin made a few motions in the air. Immediately, a vertical glowing circle of green light appeared, floating in the air. Strange symbols could be seen, flowing in a complex pattern. Dorian stepped forward as he looked at it, rubbing his chin. However, you'll need to be recognized by the signature control key from Karsos' array network, and there's no way you can GE. Kaladin abruptly shut his mouth as he saw Dorian reach forward. Whoosh! A flash of light lit up the world as the air, and every single chain that was holding down Moria shivered. Dorian's eyes began to glow, a faint aura wrapping around him. You were recognized by his signature control key? Kaladin's jaw dropped. After a moment, however, he recovered, the excitement fading from his eyes. The chains that had shivered did only that. They didn't stretch taut, and the light that Dorian had brought into existence faded. The world around him returned to normal, nothing changing. It's still useless. You might be able to access Karsos' array network, but the array network left behind by us can only be directly accessed by Ukul. His jaw dropped a second time as a second glowing circle formed in the air, this one a cool white color. What? By Asra's spatula, how in the 30,000 worlds is that possible? You can access Ukeli and Asra's array? It recognizes you? How? Kaladin's eyes seemed as if they were about to pop out of his head. He tentatively sighed again after a moment, noting that the world around him was still stable. Even if you can access the network Ukeli and Asra built, there is a safeguard that requires Asra's presence to be. WHOSH. Light blazed as the chains pulled away from Moria, the world trembling about them. Kaladin stared at Dorian, his jaw looking as if it was about to fall off his face in sheer, unadulterated shock. Despite being only a soul, his eyes almost rolled up in the back of his head, as if he was about to faint. What in the 30,000 worlds are you? Meanwhile, while all of this was going down, on a world not too far from here, the King of the Shades, Hasith Shanti, looked at the sword he held in his hand quietly. It was larger than average, a type of longsword known as a bastard sword. He held the sword gingerly, as if he didn't want to be wielding it at all. His full graying beard had been cut short, giving him a more military appearance. His calculating gray eyes and lean muscular figure remained the same, as were the dozens of knives that were strapped to the long and ornate purple robes he wore. He was standing in a large, glittering sunroom. Light was let in from giant panes of glass overhead, illuminating a mostly empty practice room. The floor was covered with a large gray mat. One wall had a selection of weapons on it and a door, while the other three were filled with mostly clear windows. The preparations are almost complete. High Lord Marcus Aurelius, I will seize Evanon from you even if I must kill off your entire planet to do so. He grit his teeth as he spoke. My people are depending on me. The entire commune is, though they don't know it. We have less than a century left. He slowly sheathed his blade with a sigh. A black angelic halo appeared around his head for a brief moment before vanishing. He sighed again, his eyes flicking to the side. Burial, enter now. His voice echoed as he waved his hand to the side. Your Highness, I bring urgent news. A shade wearing a set of dark gray plate armor walked in, holding a metal helmet in one hand. The shade was older, with a lined face and gray hair. Despite that, a vibrant lord-class aura surrounded him. He was one of the Shade King's trusted aides, in charge of bringing important information to the king in a timely manner. Just moments ago, Excelsior Gaiman sent in a request for backup. He's become entrapped in a prolonged battle with one of the family generals of the Aurelius family, General Balbinus, on Shaptal. Specifically, just above the city of Cractal. As Hasith heard this, he froze, not revealing a hint of emotion. Have any of the dukes or the church sent any significant forces to intervene yet? He queried quietly, his voice calm and collected. No, sir. Burial responded, barking out a fast response. Hasith blinked. You are dismissed. Have word passed on to the church and the district commander that oversees the planet of Shaptal. Also, I believe Duke Barmo has some influence there? Send him word as well, as a courtesy. Yes, sir. Burial dashed off, his voice echoing as he ran to fulfill the Shade King's orders. A quiet pause ensued as the Shade King was left alone. Balbinus is on Shaptal? Marcus would never give up Evanon, even with a hostage to trade. Bloodshed is unavoidable. However, I might be able to lure him out alone if I have one of his generals. Haseth's eyes flashed, his mouth twisting slightly as if in distaste. And if not, killing him would save tens of thousands of lives and precious time that we can't afford to waste. The sooner this pointless war ends, the better. The Shade King seemed to talk himself into it. He blinked slowly and then took a deep breath. The dark angelic halo appeared, hovering around his head once more. A vast, overwhelmingly powerful aura burst forth around him, visibly fracturing the air within a few meters of him. A moment later, both he and the fractured air vanished, disappearing as if they had never been there at all. Chapter 203 Status. What in the 30,000 worlds are you? Dorian's eyes were focused as he ignored Kaladin, staring intently forward. When Kaladin had called up the first array access point, Dorian had felt an instinctive connection. Just as the Thunder Saint said, the array was one built by the Demon Emperor, accessible only by other demons. Thus, accessing it was a cinch. When he had activated it, he found himself surrounded by a flurry of lights. Various sensations washed over him as the array seemed to scan him, his soul vibrating. The scan detected the various demonic laws he had gained, automatically accepting him as a demon. At the same time, he sensed a feeling of obstruction, as if he didn't have the authority to do anything despite being a demon. It recognized him as someone that wasn't an enemy, but didn't give him full control. As the scan finished, a familiar voice greeted him, tinged with confusion. Disciple Obelisk, why are you in the central array control zone? Dorian smiled. Master Bubble, he sent a mental message back to the array genie in response. I am undergoing official business for the Demon Emperor. Please refrain from interfering and grant me full access. His mental voice was authoritative, filled with absolute confidence. Of course, the array genie didn't hesitate a whit. Immediately, the feeling of obstruction vanished as Dorian gained full access to the array. Whoosh! Light blinded Dorian for a moment. Briefly, he could sense the chains that bound Moria shiver but eventually remained still. A faint demonic aura wrapped itself around him, causing him to frown slightly. There's the other array network Kaladin told me about. You are recognized by his signature control key? Dorian ignored Kaladin again as he focused on the new array network. He could sense it with his soul, feeling the various lines of energy and mysterious symbols it was composed of. The magic was foreign to him, at its very core. He had never studied anything about arrays and the magic behind them. I'll add that to the list of things to learn about. That and magic itself were two things he hadn't had the time to grasp. He relied on his powerful forms, abilities, and various laws to show off his might. I can feel a certain something resonate in my soul. Dorian frowned, his eyes gleaming with light. When he touched the second array network, he could feel a level of familiarity. It wasn't quite like the first one, but it was still something similar. It was as if the array was recognizing him. No, it's not recognizing me. He smiled slightly as he realized what was happening. It was recognizing the fragment of Euclid's soul that was partially fused with his. It's still useless. You might be able to access Carso's array network, but the array network left behind by us can only be directly accessed by Euclid. A second circle of light burst into existence in the air in front of Dorian as he successfully managed to access the array network Euclid had helped set up. When it detected the remnant soul of Euclid, it automatically set about forming a connection, almost as if the array itself was desperate to form one. Eesh, is it clingy? Can an array network be clingy? Dorian's face twitched as he sensed the response from the array. What? By Asra's spatula, how in the 30,000 worlds is that possible? Kaladin's words echoed his shock. For something to stun so powerful a figure as the Thunder Saint, it was doubtlessly something momentous. You can access Ukeli and Asra's array? It recognizes you? How? Once again, Dorian ignored his words as he focused. It won't let me do anything? As he tried to make the array activate and open up, commanding it to let them out, he felt something blocking him. Unlike how it was with the other array, this one didn't seem to have given him full, unlimited access. Oh, as he thought this, he felt a faint tingling in his soul. This tingling sensation came from his soul spell matrix, the complex collection of magical symbols in his soul that were connected with millions of lines of energy. It's resonating? When he ran into a wall blocking his access, his soul spell matrix had started to vibrate and shiver. Even if you can access the network Ukeli and Asra built, there is a safeguard that requires Asra's presence to be. Whoosh! In his mind, Dorian felt a connection once again form, this time between his soul spell matrix and the array. Specifically, Dorian felt it form between Asra, his soul spell matrix genie, and the array network. Asra, can you unlock this array and help us break past this last set of chains? He instantly asked, excitement filling him. Scanning, Asra's cool voice echoed in his head. The array had detected Asra's presence in his soul spell matrix and seemed to accept that as a substitute for whatever requirements it had. A perfect collection of coincidences had all lined up, through a trick of fate or sheer luck. Dorian wasn't sure, but he wasn't going to let this opportunity go to waste. This array is now accessible. Asra's voice responded mechanically. At the same time, Dorian felt a full, unobstructed connection form. He now had full access to both overlapping arrays, giving him full control over the sealing array network. With a single thought, he was able to bring all of the chains that were binding Moria up into the air, pulling them all taut. Light shuddered and flashed as he commanded this action, smiling fiercely. Who the hell are you? Finally, as Dorian safely finished concentrating, he looked over at Kaladin. The Thunder Saint had his hands in his hair, his mouth open as he looked at Dorian as if he was a lunatic. I'm but Ma, cough, ahem. He patted on his chest lightly. I'm Dorian. He hardly went by his last name these days. Simply Dorian was enough. I've managed to gain control of both arrays. I can sense that it's possible to pull almost all of the chains off of Moria, and at the same time, pull us out of here. He could indeed feel that all of this was possible. When he gained control of both array networks, almost everything within them was at his command. If I wanted, I could wipe out those demonic inheritances with a snap of my fingers. He frowned slightly, but if I do that, that would be the same thing as basically cutting off an entire branch of knowledge. Laws were merely laws. Despite their names, the demonic laws were not inherently evil. While they were demonic in nature, there were examples, Dorian knew, of demons that weren't evil in the past. Most people had their opinions colored by the multiple great wars, but Dorian, an outsider, considered everything from an outsider's point of view. Who am I to be the arbiter of what laws can exist and what cannot? I myself am no longer even truly human. In fact, I study all of the demonic laws, yet I would not consider myself evil. As this last thought ran through his mind, he made a conscious decision. He would leave the inheritances intact, protected and powered by the powerful array. I can't remove all of the chains. I can see that some of them are set almost permanently into Moria, sunken and fused after so many years. Probably 15% of the inner chains seem to be impossible to remove, either because of time or by design. Just by looking at this, Dorian could tell that the chains would absorb enough energy to power the array protecting the inheritances, as well as keep the center of Moria a dead zone. The rest of the world, however, will return to exactly how it used to be. Flourishing with energy, with life. A renaissance of law for Moria. He nodded. A complete victory. With this, the Shades will have to acknowledge me and Helena, and our escape should be assured. Hup. The chains that he could affect began to shake and tremble, stretching towards a breaking point. At the same time, a glowing doorway appeared in thin air, vibrating with warm yellow light. Dorian walked up to the doorway. In the background, the chains continued to stay pulled taut, slowly stretching out. They no longer needed his full focus, pulling to a breaking point almost on their own now. This caused the world around him to vibrate, light and energy fluctuating in the air. A fairly normal occurrence for him at this point during his time on Moria. Are you going to come with me? I'm about to snap the chains. The moment I walk through the portal, they will break on their own. He turned his attention fully towards the Thunder Saint, asking him a question. Kaladin looked at the glowing door, his eyes wistful for a moment before he sighed. Your performance today has exceeded my every expectation, Mr. Demon Dorian. I have never met a being quite like you before. You don't give off the vicious vibe that many demons of old did. If anything, you seem almost human to me. He gave him a small smile. Unfortunately, I'm just a soul and soul spell matrix. I might be able to live for a few hours, but unless you can create a body for me out of thin air. Yep, I can do that, though I'll need some kind of genetic data. Dorian immediately interjected, nodding his head as if it was completely normal. Kaladin stared at him. You can make a body out of thin air? You do understand how extremely difficult that is, right? Especially if you want to make it suitable for a random soul? His response was muted, for some odd reason that Dorian couldn't deduce, as if he was almost afraid of Dorian's answer. Yes, and yep, Dorian replied with an offhand shrug. Have you done this before? Kaladin's unblinking gaze never strayed from Dorian. Yep, not too long ago, actually. You could say I'm a bit of an expert. He shamelessly bragged, feeling confident. The rush of control from the multiple array networks, plus the excitement from knowing he could escape this trap and aid the demonic council members, had won over him. Kaladin stared at him again. Dorian stared back. Abruptly, Kaladin broke out laughing. Well, all right then, friend. That's good enough for me. The cheerful man walked up and patted Dorian on the back, apparently deciding that nothing Dorian said could be too far-fetched. His eyes grew serious as he looked at him, the many years he had spent alone in this world likely contributing to his willingness to believe in Dorian. This is a favor I will never forget, till the day I pass. Let it not be said that I, the Thunder Saint, am a miser. As a show of trust, allow me to gift you this, young demon. Kaladin tapped Dorian one more time on the head. This time, however, his finger glowed with white light when it made contact. Whoosh, huh? Dorian felt energy coalesce and swarm around his soul. Raw, natural energy that thronged with power, pulsating. Despite the vast amount of energy, all of it remained relatively calm and safe, not pressuring or damaging him. It was still a huge amount of energy, despite that. The large amount caused some slight amount of pain, though nothing too significant. This energy began to seep into Dorian's soul, soaking in deep and empowering him. Over the hundreds of years that I have spent here, I've built up quite a large store of purified energy, something known as soul essence, thanks to my angelic class soul spell matrix. The amount I lent you should be enough to greatly enhance yo. Kaladin cut himself off. That felt great. Dorian smiled as he sensed the feeling wear off, checking the effect on his soul. Is that all of it? He looked up, his eyes eager. He could feel a notable increase in his personal strength. He would check his status in a moment to see the exact growth. Kaladin looked at his finger and then shrugged. I guess you aren't really a normal being. Instead of a finger, this time he just openly smacked Dorian in the head, literally slapping a vast amount of energy into Dorian's soul. Whoosh! Ah! Dorian yelped out loud as equal parts pain and bliss filled his soul, an overwhelming torrent of energy serenading him. It hurts so good. Right as he finished yelling out loud, before Kaladin could even give him a weird look, the Thunder Saint's eyes widened. When Kaladin smacked Dorian, he had accidentally sent Dorian tumbling into the doorway. The moment this happened, 85% of the remaining chains burst, setting everything in sight to a chaotic explosion of light and energy. Without hesitation, Kaladin dove headfirst after Dorian, grabbing onto his shoulder as they both vanished into the glowing doorway. Ha 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 ha, great job, Mr. Demon Dorian. I really admire your decisiveness. The Thunder Saint shamelessly complimented Dorian as if it had been his decision to dive into the portal out of the blue. Dorian didn't have time to respond as he put all of his focus into having his soul devour the energy Kaladin had bestowed on him. A few seconds passed as the world warped and twisted around them. This shifting didn't last long, however. Just moments later, the duo appeared exactly where Dorian had been before, landing back in the sealed-off throne room. Dorian's soul devoured the energy Kaladin had imbued within it voraciously. It took only a few seconds for him to absorb almost everything he possibly could manage. Only about 10% of the soul essence went to waste as a rather full feeling settled upon him, making it very clear that even if Kaladin wanted to share more energy, his soul currently couldn't handle it. This method of sharing soul essence to boost another being's soul was one very few people could attempt, and not many could gain much from it. The minimum requirement to attempt it was to be at the angelic class. As for receiving it, one would need a decently strong soul that had a somewhat low understanding of the laws of the universe, open to a large amount of growth. As he arrived back in the throne room, Dorian didn't hesitate and instantly did something he'd been planning on for a while. Status. He opened up his status, checking over all the various gains he had made from acquiring multiple laws to taking in the energy that Kaladin abruptly gifted him with. Oh my gosh, what? He stared at this status in complete shock. The numbers, they were simply too ridiculous. Dorian, Soul Status, Soul Stage, Lord Class, Pseudo King, Health, Perfect, Energy, 500,909 533,221. He had already fully surpassed the average energy level of an early King Class being, despite still being in Lord Class. His energy level was double that of the vice head of the Diamond Department, someone considered a freakish Lord Class genius with an abnormally powerful energy level. Something that was supposed to be functionally impossible to achieve, the gap between the two classes considered nearly insurmountable. His energy level had, after all this time, more than doubled. This, he blinked, smiling ferociously. This I can use. Chapter 204 Thanksgiving. We've made it back. Dorian smiled as he looked around the familiar room, his eyes shining. His smile faded slightly as he looked at the various pillars that were holding up the roof. All of them were crumbling and cracked, the pristine appearance they'd had before nowhere to be seen. I must have damaged them by breaking the last chains that I could break, even if this area is still a dead zone. He realized, nodding his head slightly. Huh? Is this old Karsos' throne room? A voice echoed in Dorian's mind, feeling as if it was right behind him. Whoa! Dorian spun around, his eyes widening as he stared at the speaker. Kaladin, what exactly are you now? He blinked. Right in front of him was a glowing orb of yellow light. The orb was slightly translucent, letting him just barely see through it. As the orb floated, it bobbed up and down, refusing to remain in one place. He kind of looks like Mr. Bubble. Dorian noted wryly. This is my soul, manifested in reality. Angelic class souls can last quite a bit, though the advanced age of my soul will cut that time down pretty harshly. I probably have less than an hour to live, Kaladin said cheerfully. Whoosh! The ball of light shifted and stretched, gradually transforming into a floating image of Kaladin, down to the lightning bolt scar that cut across his face and his spiky blonde hair. Pretty cool, right? Bet you've never seen an angelic class soul out in the wild, eh? He grinned at Dorian, apparently ignoring the fact that he was slowly dying. Dorian's mind went back to when he was rescuing Wool, all the way back on the world he'd first landed on, Hosnorth. That old wizard guy that rewarded me for saving Wool back then, wasn't he an angelic class wizard? That must have been part of why he could last so long, despite being only a soul. Dorian came to a certain realization. No, I can see the similarities between you two a bit. Dorian nodded. Kaladin eyed him briefly before sighing. You're not lying. Nope. Dorian replied, upbeat. Kaladin sighed again, shaking his head ruefully. Mr. Demon Dorian, you seem to have led quite the wild life so far. How old are you? 50 years? 70? To have seen so man. I think I'm a couple months old? Maybe 2.5? 3? His jade memory boosted his memory greatly, but it didn't make all of his old memories from before he had the ability have perfect recall. The exact amount of time he had been in the 30,000 worlds was a bit fuzzy to him. Kaladin sighed deeply and held his hands out to the side in complete surrender, laughing. Never mind. Dorian waited for a moment and then spoke out loud, turning his attention to a different topic. Heyo, 15. Looks like your trap didn't quite work perfectly, huh? As he talked, he walked over to the doorway he'd arrived at. He grabbed one of the handles, tugging on it. He frowned. The handle remained in place. 15 didn't respond, either because he couldn't or because he was choosing not to. I still can't sense any laws, and I'm basically out of most law energy. His mind raced ahead as he tried to figure out a plan. Hup! In quick succession, Dorian punched forward several times, his clawed hands slamming into the doorway. Nothing. His eyes flashed. The council members should be able to hold up for a couple of hours at most. He thought, taking a step back. How do I get out of here? As Dorian was contemplating his situation, Kaladin's figure floated over. I hate to bother you right now, but I will disperse and die pretty soon if you can't help me construct a body. His voice maintained its unwavering optimism, his tone casual and without fear, as if he was talking about the weather. Right. Dorian nodded at him. Hold on. Dorian stared at him, concentrating. I don't have any genetic information about you, or even your original body. Do you have anything I can use to help reform your physique? I can help with a bit of that. Kaladin nodded. As a former angelic class expert, I still contain a bit of my old strength. While I can't reform my old body, I can create a small piece of soul skin that is bound to my soul. Bright light flashed as Kaladin's body wavered. Just a moment later, a small piece of glowing light appeared in the air, separating itself from the great hero. Soul skin? Dorian muttered out loud as he looked at the floating object. When his eyes got used to the warm yellow light, he could faintly make out what looked like skin, he guessed. It wasn't as if a piece of skin had a very unique look on its own. Yes, all angelic class beings can form a soul body, condensed from the energy of their soul spell matrix and the laws they study, gathered over time. Mine was almost completely destroyed by Emperor Karsos, but over time, I managed to condense a small piece of it. Kaladin seemed to shrug. Without access to my law of heavenly lightning, I was unable to make much progress beyond this. Oh, I see. Dorian's eyes widened slightly when he heard the law Kaladin had studied. The law of heavenly lightning? Dude, that's badass. He kept the thought to himself as he raised a finger, tapping on the soul skin. Gaining an ally out of one of the great heroes, especially a former angelic class warrior, was definitely worth the price of reviving him, if it was possible. Immediately, he felt his finger tingle. As soon as he touched it, he could sense that there was some type of genetic material he could replicate or absorb here. It's only because of my unquestionable talent, looks, charm, charisma, style, intelligence, body odor. Dorian ignored Kaladin as the man went off on a tangent, staring at the soul skin. Well, absorbing it would kill him, so I can't do that. He tossed the thought from his mind as he stared at it. Asra, show me my growth points, he commanded, thinking it over. He knew he had a large number of points, but it had cost him millions of points to revive Will, even when he used Veritas' body. Whether or not he could revive Kaladin would largely depend on that. Balance Demon. Growth Stage, 3/3, Elder Demon. Growth Progress 32,187,122/0. That's not that bad, but you hold on. What? He mentally yelled out loud as he saw the numbers in his mind. Is that 32 million? He was shocked. Previously, holding so much energy would cause a large amount of pain to sweep through his soul. Now, however, it was a sum he hadn't even noticed. How did I get so many growth points? He stared at the number, at a complete loss. Is everything all right, Mr. Demon Dorian? Kaladin's voice brought him back to the present. Why yeah, everything is cool. Hold on, I might indeed be able to bring you back. Internally, he remained shocked. It must be from all the chains that were binding Moria that I shattered. He realized after a moment's thought. I didn't think I was able to absorb the sealing tubes, so I didn't pay that much attention to them as I released them. The energy in the surrounding world was whiplashing constantly, while my entire focus was on drawing out the sealing tubes. His mind raced ahead. I must have drawn the energy into my soul as I drew out the sealing tubes, without noticing due to my intense focus. It's more than possible, it's even probable that that is where the energy is from. He realized, nodding. With this much energy, I should stand a very real chance at reforming his body, even if all I have is a scrap of this soul skin. He smiled, looking over at the soul skin. All right, Kaladin, float over here, would ya? He waved at the floating soul. Kaladin waved back and then blinked, realizing what Dorian had asked after a moment. He obediently floated over. I'm going to try the method I have. It may feel kind of way. Hey, if you're gonna be swirling around my insides with weird chemicals or magic, I definitely do not consent. Kaladin interjected, crossing his arms stubbornly. This body of mine is 100% natural grown. Dorian squinted at him. Are you really the Thunder Saint Kaladin? Do you know anyone else claiming to be him? He puffed up his chest. He resisted the urge to roll his eyes as he clutched the soul skin in one hand and rested the other on Kaladin's shoulder. The floating soul felt ephemeral and cool to the touch, Dorian's hand slipping through him slightly. He felt an innate connection when he had his hand there, however, signifying that his soul was detecting it. Asra, here's what I got. Can you work with this, recreating a body for Kaladin? After he'd gathered everything he could, he sent the fateful question over to Asra. Scanning, calculating, running simulations? Asra's voice rang out coolly in his head. A few moments passed, turning into a few minutes as they waited patiently. Dorian's soul spell matrix was far stronger than it had been before, but he also had far less genetic material to work with, compared to now. Before, he eventually was working to morph an already formed body to match Will's soul, while now he had to recreate one out of basically thin air. Finally, Asra responded, yes, it will cost roughly 17,827,289 points. Success is rated at 87.26%. However, the current material will only allow for one attempt. Her words came off mechanical. 87% with some change? Roughly 18 million growth points? That's good enough. His eyes flashed as he added out loud. It's possible, though I can't guarantee success. It's almost a 9 out of 10 chance I can make you a complete body. Do you wish to go through with the attempt? 9 out of 10? Kaladin's response was ecstatic. Ha ha ha, demon boy. I used to go into battle with odds stacked against me 99 to 1. 9 to 1 in my favor, now that is something I can get behind. All right, Dorian nodded. He didn't think Kaladin would have refused. After all, saying no would be essentially the same thing as dying. Then, I'll begin immediately. Asra, initiate the procedure. Let's go, he ordered, determination filling him. Immediately, the world around Dorian seemed to condense in. He felt as if he was growing small, his consciousness zeroing in on the patch of soul skin. He stared at it, feeling various bits of energy flood off from his soul as Asra began to direct the operation. The air quivered as dots of energy floated in the air, vibrating. Dorian's body felt hot, and then cold, and then somewhere in between, power fluctuating in his veins as the growth points from his soul began to pour out, soaring into the patch of soul skin. Focus, Dorian, feel the energy. Feel the growth energy. Growth energy was the manifestation of growth points in reality, though he used the two terms almost interchangeably. Gradually, Dorian could vaguely sense Asra forming some type of network of energy in the air, all centered around the patch of soul skin. She was even more controlled and precise than she had been before when trying to resurrect Will, probably a result of his more powerful soul spell matrix. Minutes passed as she kept working. Gradually, more and more light began to emanate from the small patch of soul skin. This light began to become blinding, blocking Dorian's vision, though Asra seemed unobstructed. If not for his passive demonic eyes ability, he would have long since gone blind from staring at it so intently. Grr! A growl escaped his lips as he concentrated on controlling a now vast torrent of growth energy that was flowing out of his soul. This energy was powerful and vigorous, full of life. Whoosh! Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the world around Dorian seemed to quiver as a small explosion shook the air. One last flash of light blinded him and set him to stumbling back as the patch of soul skin vanished from his hand. Success! Hup! Dorian caught himself, managing to retain his balance as he cleared his vision, looking up. Standing in front of him was a picture-perfect, clothed replica of the Thunder Saint Kaladin, giving him a cheeky smile, no longer translucent or floating. Well, that worked out well. Kaladin's voice sounded exactly how it did in Dorian's mind, nodding at Dorian. Seems like I'm back among the living. Thank you. The man's response was rather muted for having just come back to life. Yes, it worked. Dorian fist pumped the air, jumping with excitement. He had a huge grin on his face as he looked at the Thunder Saint, beyond pleased. He had managed to bring one of this universe's great heroes back to life. And it had been surprisingly easy. It must be because of how powerful my soul spell matrix is now. He realized, still smiling. You made me a full soul body. Ha ha ha, interesting. As Kaladin spoke, he poked himself a few times. Each time he poked, faint blue light gleamed off his body. Oh right, what exactly is a soul body? Dorian kept grinning as he looked at Kaladin, asking a question. It's a type of unique physical form that is half spiritual, half physical. With a body like this, I should be able to safely traverse the 30,000 worlds and make it over to my free school of thunder without issue, though my power will be rather limited. Kaladin shrugged as he finished. But I'm fine with that. Far better than dying, right? He grinned cheekily back. Dorian nodded, feeling a sensation of tiredness sweep into him. Creating Kaladin's soul body had taken a lot out of him, energy that he couldn't easily replace. It was tiring to his soul, something that would take time to recover. That is, though, only if we can get out of here in the first place. Kaladin gestured with his hand. Without access to the laws, I'm pretty useless in this soul body. Well, I have my devilish good looks to raise morale, but that's about it. He sighed dramatically. Dorian frowned, ignoring Kaladin's unusual personality as he glanced around. He focused back on the present situation. You're not wrong, I know. I was voted most handsome in my academy class when I was Kaladin began. No, not about that. Dorian glared at the Thunder Saint. About here. I'm not sure how we will escape. Guiding light. Whoosh. A brilliant sword of molten light appeared, burning in the air. Dorian wielded the sword in his hand, staring at the door in front of him as he walked up to it. Ha! FZZZZZ. The sword slammed into the door and instantly fizzled out, unable to affect it in the slightest. It's no use. Now that I have a soul body, I can sense a bit more about us. This place is sealed off from space itself. Regular attacks, even powerful ones like that flaming sword, are useless. He shook his head as he continued. Unless you can figure out a way to teleport without using magic and being cut off from the laws of the universe, it doesn't look good for us. Dorian blinked. Abruptly, a memory filled him. His eyes widened as he called upon Asra. Asra? Do I still have the warping turkey bloodline? It was a bloodline he had picked up but never found the time to use, mainly due to its annoying side effect. It was a powerful beast that could teleport naturally using an ability. However, it also contained another ability that could not be removed, vastly lowering its intelligence to below that of even a child. An idiot turkey, as Simon Shaptal called it. Yes, show me that bloodline plus any new Lord-class bloodlines I have that I can evolve. He ordered. Acknowledged. Asra's voice rang out in his head as a screen popped up. Stored bloodlines. Lord class. Igloo demon, gazelle hoofed fire demon. Iron wasp demon, white demon worm. Blue armed demon, yellow beak demon. Goringer tiger demon. Grandmaster class. Warping turkey, Tazone rhino. Midnight blade tiger, giant boar snake. Esther ground dragon, etc. He blinked a second time, slowly turning to Kaladin. I might have a way out of this mess for us, but, there might be a few complications. What kind of complications? Kaladin shot back, his voice laced with suspicion. Dorian hesitated for a split second before asking, how good are you at handling turkeys? Chapter 205 Warping Turkey. Dorian had a multitude of demonic bloodlines to expand upon, many of them looking like very useful additions. If he combined them with his balanced demon form, even he didn't know how powerful he could become. That will have to wait for later, though. I can't afford to waste any time at all. The demonic council members were fighting for their lives right outside. How good am I at handling turkeys? Kaladin blinked, staring at Dorian. A few short moments passed as Dorian filled the Thunder Saint in. He didn't share everything, but gave the man a general gist of the situation. He had the power to shapeshift and could temporarily morph into a brainless turkey that could teleport. However, the soul adaptation period meant he couldn't instantly shift back. As long as I ask Asra, even if I become an idiot turkey, I should revert back after the adaptation period is done. He nodded his head, sighing as he tried to convince himself. This is our best bet out of here. I don't really have any other options. Well, I can make a mean turkey cobbler. Kaladin commented, answering Dorian's question rather late. They have cobbler in the 30,000 worlds? Dorian pushed the thought aside as he commanded Asra. Begin evolving the warping turkey bloodline. Acknowledged. Asra's voice echoed in his head. You'll need to hold on tight to me when I transform. As Dorian reiterated some instructions, he saw Kaladin nod back. This had better work. Asra, transform me into the turkey as soon as it's ready. Acknowledged. Asra replied, and then a moment later. Absorption complete. Transformation beginning. Soul adaptation period starting. Dorian transformed into a warping turkey. Whoosh. Cluck. Life is cluck. Cluck is life. I look around. Everything looks dull. I don't like this room. It feels old. Cluck. I walk up to a wall. Peck. The wall is hard. I don't like the wall. Thud. A noise. I spin around. A being. An ugly being. I don't like it. It jumps at me. I don't like it more. I try to jump back. Oh wait, there's a wall behind me. I hit the wall. Ouch. The ugly being grabs me. No, I hate ugly things. I try to run. It won't let go. I struggle. It still won't let go. Bad ugly being. It's why you're ugly. 'Cause you're bad. I can't escape. Wait, I can. I feel a hole. A hole that I can't see. But I know there is a hole there. I jump into the hole. Whoosh. We leave the old room. Oh hey, the ugly being let go. We both appear in another room. Lots of beings in here. Lots of small ones, and then lots of big ones. They're fighting. They're also ugly. One of them tries to hit me. I jump backwards. I am mad. Oh, I can feel something. I can hit back, but not with my wings. They are too pretty to hit such an ugly being. I feel like I can create a ball, and that ball will shoot something. A laser. Oh no, the new ugly being is trying to hit me again. It's covered in metal and shiny, but still ugly. I jump in a hole. I appear right behind it. I make a ball and shoot a laser. The ball feels like it's hard to make, but I ignore that and then it's easy. The laser hits the metal ugly thing and knocks him backwards. Ha 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 ha. Stupid metal thing. Ooh, wiggling is really easy here. Tilda, let's wiggle and dance Tilda. Shake that turkey butt. Tilda, wiggle wiggle Tilda. Oh, I see a bunch more of the ugly metal beings. They're fighting small ugly beings. I don't like the metal ones. They're mean and ugly. Well, they're all ugly. But those ones are super ugly. I frown fiercely. Wait, I can't frown. I don't have lips. What is a frown? What are lips? Ah, another ugly metal one is coming at me. I make 5 more balls. 5 more lasers knock it back. I really don't like it. Oh no, more of them are appearing from the walls. Dozens of them. They're so ugly. No, I raise my mighty head. Bow before this godly turkey. Cluck. I wiggle. 100 black balls appear above me as I glare at the ugly metal beings. Go away. The first thing Dorian heard when he woke up was Asra's voice echoing in his mind. Transforming back into balanced demon physique as requested. Soul adaptation period complete. Dorian groaned, clutching at his head as he blinked blearily. After a second he shot up, his heart pounding. I'm back to, his train of thoughts abruptly cut off as he looked around, his eyes widening in shock. He was standing in a wasteland. Huh? What happened? Where I am? The only thing he saw was utter devastation and destruction. Collapsed rocks, shards of metal and rock, cracked stone, smoke rising from small fires. It was as if he was standing in the aftermath of some horrific war. The stench of burning sulfur, melted steel, and smoke stained the air, causing his nose to twitch. Cough. He coughed by instinct, not because he needed to, as he waved his hand, clearing some of the smoke around him. Asra, how long was I in a warping turkey form? His heart was filled with worry as he stared at his surroundings. Vast destruction like this didn't just happen in 5 minutes after Al. Approximately 5 minutes. Dorian blinked. Oh, air. That was quick. He rubbed his head sheepishly. Did I cause all this? He queried. I do not track your ongoing activities beyond evolving forms and law progression. She replied unhelpfully. Dorian took a few steps as he sifted through the rubble. He could make out some heavily scarred white stone, similar to the stones that built up the central castle. I must have wrecked it when I was brainless. He rubbed his chin. Did unsealing so many things weaken the protection that made the castle so durable? It was the only thing he could think of. The pillars inside that room had indeed crumbled after all. It wasn't an unreasonable conclusion. Wait, my warping turkey bloodline. Asra. Show me the info for it and my status. Dorian, Soul status, Soul stage. Lord class, Pseudo King. Health. Perfect. Energy. 210,827 533,221. Warping Turkey, Grandmaster class, peak. Maximum energy level, 1012. Ability. One with nature, warping physique, resilient body. Warping turkeys are creatures beloved by nature. Standing roughly half a meter tall with a coat of thick brown feathers and a several meters wide wingspan, they possess the unique ability to create holes in reality and instantly transport from one hole to another. However, because they are blessed by nature, storing a great deal of energy and the extra organs needed to have a warping physique, their intelligence is greatly limited. Warping turkeys have tough, durable bodies equivalent to a Grandmaster class beast in raw strength despite their small size. The warping physique ability, that's the one that screwed me over, but also saved me. The ability required extra organs stored in one's brain to operate, but as a result, vastly limited the size one's brain could reach. Whoa, I spent so much energy in only 5 minutes? Dorian ignored the other abilities for now as he blinked, his head looking left and right in shock. The area around him looked like it had been destroyed for an hour or two at least, not just a few minutes. Kaladin? Baron Radisho? His voice was calm and collected, not betraying the nervousness he felt. The smoky surroundings were eerily quiet, something that he found faintly unsettling. Abruptly, Dorian felt a twitch in his soul. A feeling of familiarity, one that touched him to his core. A feeling he only got when another anomaly was present. He spun around, his heart pounding as he zeroed in on where the feeling was coming from. He immediately began to jog towards it, his eyes cool. Several seconds passed as he scampered over the rubble, his balanced demon form agilely dodging through the ruins of the large central castle. As he moved, the smoky and dusty air gradually began to clear in front of him. Thud, he came to a halt on a type of solid stone floor, only marginally cracked. He could vaguely make out several cracked pillars and a partially broken down wall in the background, much of the room destroyed. At the very back of the room, there was a familiar stone platform, with an archaic, cracked throne. As soon as he saw it, he instantly realized this room was a physical replica of the one he had been trapped in. Or, rather, the room he had been trapped in was a replica of this room. These thoughts were brushed to the side, however, as he saw the figure resting languidly on that throne, staring back at him calmly. A vaguely human-looking being with gray skin, wearing a set of ordinary gray clothes. A small dagger was clasped into a sheath on his waist, while his fingers tapped lightly on the side of the throne. 15. Dorian's voice was calm, but on the inside he raged as he stared at the creature that had tried again and again to kill him, putting him and Helena into grave danger. Brother, you never did tell me what number you are. 15 shrugged. Dorian took a few more steps forward, energy starting to crackle around his body. Touching light, a brilliant blade of molten light appeared in his hand, one he held up and pointed at 15. You aren't going to get away this time. He glared at the other anomaly. 15 sighed. I didn't even want to kill you. He kept tapping on the throne as he watched Dorian walk towards him. I can sense that you used the same method as I. You dilated time to gain an advantage. I can feel that your consciousness is older than it should be. I've done quite a bit of research into souls. Dorian paused. Is he talking about when I was trapped in my soul spell matrix for several years? That had been a trying experience, so long ago. Why are you doing all of this? 15. What are you trying to gain from me? Dorian decided to question the anomaly directly before doing anything else. If he could force 15 to stop attacking him, he would be fine with simply leaving, though he had little trust in 15's words. You understand nothing, brother. You and I, we are merely pawns in his game. Gathering experience, gathering knowledge, experimenting. 15 sighed. As he spoke, his body shook, as if he was weighed down with some terrible burden. Anywhere the laws touch, he can see. He can't read your mind or see into your heart, but everything you say, everything you do. 15's gray manter body looked up, his eyes piercing towards Dorian. He knows. A brief pause ensued as 15's words echoed. More smoke continued to clear around them, revealing more chunks of rock and destroyed castle. You cannot permanently hide from him, lest you break the chains he has set upon your soul. 15 gestured at Dorian. The anomaly leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands as he brought them up. The chains? Do you mean the remnant of Ukeli that is connected to our soul? Dorian asked back, his mind racing as he went over 15's words. If what 15 was saying was true, 15's silence was all the answer Dorian needed. But how can you kill that? The remnant isn't something that can be destroyed. The moment it's removed or an anomaly dies, it will merge with fate and vanish, seeking out more of its kind. This was all knowledge Dorian could instinctively feel, tidbits he'd picked up over time. 15 was silent for a moment. He seemed to be talking to Dorian as an excuse to go over his own plans, instead of genuinely wanting to talk. Dorian got the feeling that he didn't talk to people often. I cannot kill the remnant. I don't know if anyone can, not before he escapes to inform others. But you sigh, Dorian began but was interrupted. I said I could break the chains he left. 15's eyes flashed. The method I devised can dislodge the soul remnant and free my soul. It can't kill him, but then, the remnant will just merge with another anomaly. It won't have stopped him at all. Dorian countered, yes, that is accurate. And that remnant will carry memories of an insane, foolish anomaly that risked its life doing foolish things. He will assume I died, allowing me to survive freely. With my gray manter form, it should be simple to avoid interacting with him ever again. 15 smiled grimly, nodding his head. But, if you've interacted with the remnant, you know what he is like. He is an actual monster. As Dorian spoke these words, he surprised himself. Deep down, in his core, he realized that he had become fiercely opposed to Ukeli. From the memories he had of the man, as well as the vision of the future he saw, Dorian was certain that if Ukeli was left to his own discretion, something terrible would happen, something that would kill billions, that would kill trillions. And, as he grew stronger and stronger, as he grew closer to Helena and made friends, he gradually came to realize that he wanted to stop that thing. If he let Ukeli go unchecked, people he knew and loved would die. As an anomaly, and as a man that cared about justice, he had a responsibility to face off against the other anomalies. Why should I care for their lives? No one has cared about mine. 15's voice was cutting as he shook his head. Who do you think you are? This reality's destined savior or something? The universe does not revolve around you, brother. You are merely a small piece, just like me. His words were biting. A single pebble cannot block a raging river. Dorian stared at the other anomaly, his eyes narrowing. He didn't let his emotions fly through, controlling them as he stared at 15. A pebble alone can stop nothing. Yet it only takes a single pebble to start an avalanche. Dorian began. What if it's not a single pebble, but many? Working together, shaping as one. It may take time, but even the course of a raging river will change as the eons pass. His eyes flashed. Do not discount the might of a single pebble. 15 started at Dorian and then shook his head, laughing quietly. Your foolish idealism will merely lead to your death. 15 waved around them, motioning at the ruined castle. Here, this is my sanctuary. The one place I can hide. Where I can be myself. He has no idea what I truly am, he has never seen my true self. As he looked around, his face wrinkled slightly. The damage Dorian had caused was quite extensive. Dorian pretended he didn't notice. The same applies to you. What happens here, he cannot see. Try to contact the remnant soul, you'll find that he cannot respond. In his soul form, he is tied to the laws. In places where there are no laws, he can't see or hear anything through you. 15 finished, looking back at him. Dorian took 15's words in, blinking. He tried what 15 suggested, seeing if he could contact Ukeli. My connection with that small remnant of Ukeli, it's distant? As he tried, he instantly realized that something was strange. It was as if the remnant soul that he could sense, a tiny portion that was faintly attached to him, was no longer present. He was used to constantly knowing that the remnant soul was there, in the faintest depths of his soul. For it to suddenly feel distant, it's not like I try to talk to it ever, not these days. He was more than strong enough to ignore the tiny remnant now. But that is odd. There was at least some truth to 15's words. Still, he's like a mad dog. If I leave him here, he will just come back to haunt me. I need to take him out now. It felt somewhat callous, but with Helena at risk, Dorian wasn't willing to leave 15 walking free. He took a few steps forward, halfway across the ruined stone room towards 15's throne. As he walked, he activated his perfect body ability, the world around him losing some of its color as his physique was greatly boosted. 15 noticed all of this with a smile. "Are you sure you have time for this now, brother?" He nodded at Dorian languidly. "I have all the time in the world to deal with you." Dorian didn't let himself become swayed. "When I get a few steps closer, I'll send out a dozen Hyperion beam." His thoughts were broken as 15 said something that caught his complete attention. "Oh, what about your lover?" Dorian felt his heart freeze over. "What do you mean?" he stuttered out, his stomach dropping. "Are you sure you have all the time in the world? I must say, your lover is in quite the sticky situation right now. You might want to retreat and go check on that." 15's words sounded sincere and honest. "What did you do?" Dorian stared at 15, his every iota of being emanating killing intent. The air around him trembled, fate itself reacting to his emotions. Darkness swarmed around Dorian, a deep-seated, deathly aura faintly appearing. "Me? I didn't do anything, but I happen to know some extremely powerful people are on Shaptal right now, looking for you and her. Do you really have the time to waste here with me?" Dorian froze, blinking several times. His heart pounded as he tried to make a decision, caught in a quandary. "You don't have time to dawdle." Thud. Boom. 15 cut himself off abruptly as blood spattered from his lips, a look of shock rising as he looked down. A large, glistening black dagger had appeared, speared right into the center of his chest. A small explosion of blue light formed from the dagger, energy crackling in the air and then instantly fizzling out. "Would you look at us? This is practically a family reunion." A sardonic voice broke in as, out of the smoky darkness, a new figure appeared, juggling a half-dozen blue daggers. A somewhat handsome human, with short blonde hair and a lean build. One that Dorian instinctively recognized, his soul pulsing as his heart grew steady, pushing past his emotional turmoil. "Mellow. Damn. Another one. Brother, you were supposed to leave so I could kill you on the way back. I can't believe you enlisted another one of us as an ally." 15's body seemed to shiver as he looked at Dorian with a sigh. "You're smarter than you look." 15's body blurred and then vanished completely, leaving behind one last, fading remark. "I guess I'll bury the two of you here and now." Past his emotional turmoil. "Mellow. Damn. Another one. Brother, you were supposed to leave so I could kill you on the way back. I can't believe you enlisted another one of us as an ally." 15's body seemed to shiver as he looked at Dorian with a sigh. "You're smarter than you look." 15's body blurred and then vanished completely, leaving behind one last, fading remark. "I guess I'll bury the two of you here and now." Chapter 206 Sheer. "I guess I'll bury the two of you here and now." 15's words faded into the air, leaving behind an empty throne. Mellow's blood-stained dagger fell atop the stone throne with a clang as 15's body vanished. "Careful, Mellow. He's here but we can't see him." Dorian yelled out loud. His perfect body ability was active, as were any other passive abilities that increased his power. His mystic armored body in particular kept a strong barrier around him. "I'm aware, Dorian," Mellow returned. As he finished speaking, Mellow leapt backwards, a pair of black wings appearing as he floated in the air. Crackling, black energy surrounded him, fluctuating. At the same time, a long, glowing sword appeared, floating in the air in front of Mellow as he summoned it. "Mellow's not using a law. None of us can use the power of law here. None of my artifacts will work either, though he might have some rare ones that do." The thought flashed through Dorian's mind as he twitched, looking to the left and right as he tried to track 15. He kept his senses spread, trying to feel for the familiar sensation of an anomaly. Unfortunately, Mellow's presence made it harder to detect. He was already feeling a strong sense of familiarity from Mellow, trying to find a much lighter one under that was much more difficult. "My dagger is not a normal artifact. That was a soul-shearing dagger created by the pseudo-angelic class craftsman god of Tryon, Galber Bruin," Mellow began, his voice echoing. "While most of its power is nullified here, the attack will have seriously injured him. The blood he spilled is heartblood, the core essence of his bloodline. He will slowly bleed out if he doesn't immediately retreat." As Mellow finished, he clapped his hands together. A cocoon of black lightning surrounded him, creating a seemingly impenetrable barrier. "Here, The sword flew over to Dorian, slightly taking him by surprise. He snagged it out of the air, blinking. As soon as he grabbed the sword, he almost dropped it. It weighed several tons, at least, and was much heavier than he had expected. It gave off a faint metallic glow, powerful and sharp. A very high-quality sword. I prepared both of these weapons to help us kill him. This is a body-shearing sword, also made by the craftsman god. If you can stab him with this, its effects will stack with the soul-shearing dagger, and cause fatal injuries to his soul. He will almost certainly die from it. Mello exclaimed. Dorian eyed the blade briefly before replying. Why don't you just stab him yourself, then? He wasn't exactly a swordmaster, his Lord Inigo persona notwithstanding. Mello's skill with the blade likely outclassed his. He kept the thought to himself as he looked around. He saw the empty stone floor and an unknown gray-skinned man walking towards him right where 15 had vanished from, just a few dozen meters away. No sign of 15 or anything unusual. This clone of mine is too weak without access to law energy. All it is good for is surprise attacks. Your body is more than 10 times as strong as mine. I can barely use this black lightning thanks to an artifact I brought. Most of my artifacts aren't working. Mello quickly explained. At the same time, he began to send out streaks of crackling lightning, the energy swarming through the air. These bolts fluctuated back and forth, seeking out the corners of the plateau and the open areas, going over different places repeatedly. If 15 had been sneaking about invisibly or anything of the sort, he would have found himself not only zapped by lightning but also exposed. Unfortunately, the lightning had no effect. The bolts flew past Dorian, crackling the air but returning no result. He can phase beyond reality, beyond fate itself. The lightning won't change that. Dorian was incredibly tense as the world around him seemed to devolve to chaos. The gray-skinned man that was walking towards him seemed unaffected by the lightning, something that was completely normal in Dorian's eyes. He casually ignored that being, trying to find 15. I know, I'm trying to draw him out. Mello returned. Ah, screw it. Dorian stored the body-shearing sword in his spatial ring, his heart pounding. Let's do it my way. Transform. Black-scaled rage dragon, go. Immediately, his physique expanded and changed into a towering black dragon. His scales gleamed as his body formed, giving off a sense of raw power and majesty. The instant he finished morphing, he unleashed a sea of black flames, covering the entire area in the deadly dragonfire. Mello was flying in the air and flew several meters higher when he saw this, dodging the attack. The ocean of flames melted the surface of the rock and stone it encountered, creating a hellish nightmare to almost all living creatures. The flames interacted with the black lightning Mello sent out, even causing the lightning bolts to morph and gain certain burning properties. Soon the entire throne room was swept up. Dorian showed no signs of stopping. The increases to his soul had greatly enhanced his ability to unleash black flames, especially in his draconic form where it both came naturally to him and had a low energy cost. Throughout this all, the completely normal gray-skinned man continued to walk towards Dorian, unaffected. Come on, 15, come out, Dorian thought, snorting as his draconic body shivered. I can do this all day. His wish came true. From out of nowhere, a gray-skinned figure appeared right in front of Dorian's draconic visage, just a couple of meters to his right. The moment it appeared, two things happened. The gray-skinned figure instantaneously transformed. It immediately morphed into a 30-meter-tall demonic being, covered in huge muscles and green scales. The air around it pulsed with a demonic aura, giving it a terrifying appearance. 15's greater throne demon form. At the same time, Dorian's senses tingled as he felt the sensation only an anomaly could give off, just a couple of meters from him. 15. The anomaly had struck. His thoughts raced ahead in an instant. 15 was right beside him, but out of sight. By the time Dorian managed to turn and try to defend himself, he would already be attacked. In the split second he had to react, he did the only thing he could think of. He changed back to his balanced demon form. Whoosh! The transformation process was completed in a fraction of a second. His body rapidly shrank to that of his balanced demon form. The sweltering sea of black flames didn't affect him even in a different form, leaving him unencumbered. Less than a heartbeat later, an enormous fist punched through where Dorian's draconic head had been. A shockwave formed as 15 unleashed some type of ability, causing the air to explode out. Boom! A concussive blast of wind spun Dorian's balanced demon form around, not because he was unable to tank the hit, but because the ground he was standing on shattered and broke apart, causing him to lose traction. 15, in that moment, had stumbled slightly as he shrugged off the black flames all around him. The explosive gust of wind knocked part of the sea of dragonfire away, but not before singeing his legs, just enough to slow his attack, the unexpected pain taking him by surprise. While 15 was phasing, he was unable to sense what was happening in reality, and thus unable to avoid the black flames. Hup! Dorian immediately jumped forward as soon as he landed, leaping back into the fray. His mystic armored body had dispersed most of the impact, leaving him uninjured. It would take a direct blow to harm him, at the bare minimum. He led forward with a punch of his own, his extremely strong balanced demon form smashing the rocky floor as he sent up shards of stone shrapnel. 15 crossed his arms as he blocked Dorian's punch, several of his green scales cracking at the impact. The blow sent his huge, 30-meter-tall body sliding backwards, kicking up a small cloud of stone dust. Boom! Several bolts of black lightning slammed into 15, knocking him back several steps and causing him to stumble. Many of the scales that covered his body visibly burnt and cracked, falling off of him. "Nice shot, Mello," Dorian yelled out loud as he refused to let up. In just a few short seconds, Dorian exchanged multiple blows with 15, all while the other anomaly was being pelted by Mello. He experimented with twisting fate as he fought, but found that its effectiveness wasn't high. He wasn't sure if it was because they were all anomalies, or because they were in the center of the dead zone where laws couldn't be reached, but it offered only minor assistance at best. Due to the size difference, most of Dorian's attacks were leaping ones. Dorian's form was more agile and, despite the very large size difference, roughly on par in terms of physical strength. His perfect body ability plus his already strong balanced demon form was enough to tip the balance. Boom! Mello shot off several more bolts of black lightning, working mostly as support. Dorian tried to figure out a good time to work in the sword Mello had given him, but found no opportunities. He was able to get away with punches, but none of his attacks managed to do significant damage. After just a few moments, all of the injuries that had appeared on 15's body had miraculously healed. His regeneration levels seemed to be incredibly high, as if he was facing no burden in this battle. If close range won't work, I'll go for long range. Just as he was thinking that, 15 did something rather unexpected. He jumped up into the air, raising his arms above his head. He ignored another lightning bolt sent out by Mello, instead slamming his hands down onto the ground. Boom! A large shockwave spread as 15 activated his shockwave creating ability, combining with the raw power of his Greater Throne Demon's physique. A literal wave of stone shrapnel serenaded the air, flinging away from 15 like bullets. Whoosh! Dorian's clawed feet dug deep into the ground as he held himself in place, his arms covering his face and chest. He felt his bones rattle, his teeth clacking off each other as he withstood the blow, dozens of rocks slamming into him and fading to dust, unable to pierce his mystic armored body ability. Mello fared a bit worse, knocked out of his protective lightning bubble, right into the waiting black flames. When Dorian saw this, he instantly cancelled his black flames ability, causing them to dissipate. "Accept your fate," 15's voice boomed as he growled, immediately charging right at Dorian again. As he ran, 15's body shivered as he transformed once more, this time becoming a large, black-skinned wolf with white stripes on its tail. According to a brief note from Asra, he had become a sonic mane wolf. Dorian didn't have time to check up on what that was as 15's body blurred forward. Dorian tensed up as he saw this, his heart pounding as he activated multiple Hyperion beams. "If close range won't work, I'll take you out from afar." He repeated his earlier thought, this time prepared to go all out. 15's body hurtled towards him and then charged right by him, breaking off into a mad sprint towards Mello. His sonic mane wolf was especially fast, crossing the distance between him and Mello before Dorian could make a move. Another concussive blast of wind shook the air, this one stronger than before, as 15 launched an attack from point blank. It seemed it was the natural ability of the sonic mane wolf. Just like black flames were stronger and easier to use in Dorian's black-scaled rage dragon form, 15's shockwave creating ability was likely enhanced when he was in that form. Mello was strong, but the body he had here was just a clone. Further, he couldn't access any laws to support himself. Dorian still wasn't certain what law Mello studied, but it obviously couldn't help him here. His clone was at least Lord class, but compared to 15's true body going all out, it fell short. With a resounding grunt, Mello shot across the sky, his body landing somewhere in the distance. The impact audibly snapped a large number of bones, a sickening crunch that made it clear that he had been taken out of commission. If he wasn't dead, he would at least need several minutes to recover. Damn, Dorian swore as he saw this, blinking furiously. 15 was an opponent he could not take lightly. His heart thumped as he felt a very real sense of danger. He could die here. Even worse, if he did so, he would leave Helena to her fate, captured by the Shade Forces or whomever it was that was looking for her. She was a powerful enemy commander that was currently very weak, and even if they didn't torture her for information, they would undoubtedly still execute her. As this thought flashed through him, a fanatic sense of determination ran in his veins. He absolutely would not give up if he could find a chance of victory. All I need to do is pierce him with Mello's sword and I win. Even if he has a freakish ability to recover, injuries to the soul are not a joke. At the least, he will become stunned and leave himself open. Dorian's reasoning was sound. As the thought crossed his mind and he saw 15 jump up into the air to attack again, his sonic main wolf form reusing the same type of attack, inspiration struck. Hup! Instead of waiting for 15 to land, Dorian jumped into the air. He jumped quite high, leaping more than 50 meters up. The ground beneath him exploded due to the force, a webwork of cracks spreading out. After Dorian weakened large parts of the array, the nearby stone had lost its previously invincible nature. 15 landed on the ground, his wolf form pausing as it looked up at Dorian instead of unleashing a shockwave. The air began to quiver around it as it sprinted over to be below him, preparing to ambush him as he landed. When Dorian saw 15 stand still, just as Dorian reached the apex of his leap, he smiled. He then withdrew and threw Mello's body-shearing sword at 15, transforming into a black-scaled rage dragon right after. A fraction of a second later, he activated an ability he hadn't used in a long time. Expand. Earlier, before he entered the dead zone and was still getting ready, Dorian had made a few silent preparations. One of those was to regain the expand ability. According to Asra, that ability had vanished when he got the perfect body ability. The perfect body ability was a mix of both his expand and his condense abilities, mysteriously created by Ukeli. However, she also stated that Dorian still had the Titan and Graycon bloodlines stored. They were stored within him. While it was impossible to activate the perfect body ability and either of the expand and condense abilities at the same time, he discovered that he could still reconstruct the abilities. It would be possible to use one of them as long as he deactivated his perfect body ability. The process of reforming his Graycon bloodline turned out to be surprisingly strenuous on his soul, something that wouldn't have been possible if his soul hadn't grown to be so abnormally strong after taking in all of the demonic inheritances. He had managed to regain the condense ability long ago, due to the Titan bloodline being far easier to manipulate, but never used it since it was inferior to his perfect body ability. Dorian's black-scaled rage dragon form abruptly grew a gargantuan amount. Its bones, muscles, tendons, and scales expanded a huge amount, growing to several times its previous size. It was now a behemoth that towered over everyone and everything present, weighing millions and millions of pounds. In terms of height, it was more than 70 meters tall, stretched and expanded to the very limit that Dorian's soul could handle. Despite that, in terms of raw strength, it was much slower and only on par with his perfect body black-scaled rage dragon form. Dorian ignored all of that, however. None of those were the reasons for his transformation. Instead, he focused on the body-shearing sword that he had lobbed at 15. His entire mind zeroed in on this single blade. Every iota of focus was on it as he put almost everything he had into his next movement. Lesser magnetic manipulation, go. Push. His lesser magnetic manipulation ability allowed him to push and pull magnetic things. The body-shearing sword was metallic and reacted to his command. It was created by a legendary craftsman and was incredibly durable, carrying with it mystical properties. If Dorian had pushed it with his normal dragon form, Despite his black-scaled rage dragon being quite large, the impact wouldn't have been anything too significant. It would have been a powerful strike, but that was it. However, when he pushed with the full force and weight of a leviathan that weighed millions of pounds, the attack was almost unfathomably strong. The impact alone would have disintegrated a lesser artifact. It even managed to slightly damage the body-shearing sword, cracking it. The artifact still maintained its coherency, however, only the hilt suffering a small amount of damage, keeping its mystical properties. An instant after Dorian activated his ability, the sword he had thrown vanished, moving so quickly it seemed to teleport as it plummeted towards 15 with enough kinetic energy to level a mountain. Chapter 207 Absorb. The blade shot downward like a bullet, aimed right at 15. It moved faster than Dorian could make out, stabbing through the air. In a fraction of a second, it had already arrived right next to 15. Thud. Whoosh. Boom. An explosion shook the air as the ground 15 had been standing on erupted, shards of stone and rock scattering as a large cloud of dust formed. I hit him, but Dorian shifted back to his balanced demon form, instantly activating his perfect body ability as he stared at the remnants. The magical sword had managed to hit 15, shearing into his right shoulder. In the middle of the impact, however, as the blade was cutting in, 15's body had vanished from Dorian's sight. Hup! In just a second, Dorian landed on the ground, running over to where 15 had been hit. Clap! He slammed his clawed hands together, creating a storm of wind that brushed aside the dust as he cleared his vision. Damn it! He spoke aloud as he spotted something lying in the ruptured stone floor. The sword Mello had lent him. The attack had hit 15, but because the sword didn't pierce all the way through, the injury wasn't fatal. 15 phased through reality as he was being stabbed, avoiding half of the attack. Still, his soul should be heavily injured. I can't let him escape. Helena will be in dire risk if I do. Dorian's eyes blazed as he spun around, scanning everything. Dust spinning in various clouds, chunks of shattered rock and stone, small flames and various pieces of wreckage, a gray-skinned man sitting on one knee. He couldn't see anything suspicious. 15 was nowhere he could consciously detect, the area around him devoid of life. So be it, he muttered aloud. If I can't find you directly, we'll do it the hard way. He held a hand up. When Dorian had entered into his warping turkey form, he gained a few unique abilities. Some only applied to the warping turkey form itself, like its ability to teleport. Others applied to all of his forms. One of those abilities was called, One with Nature. Ability. One with Nature. This passive ability enhances the body and soul of a being, adapting them to bear energy in great amounts. Energy will course through one's veins naturally, greatly easing the burden placed on one's body and soul when activating an ability. This ability was a large part of why warping turkeys survived as a species, despite their low intelligence. It was because of this ability that they could teleport over and over, escaping enemies with ease. It was a passive ability, an ability that applied to all forms, not just Dorian's warping turkey form. Above Dorian's hand, a small, black ball appeared. Then another one, then another, followed by another, and another. In less than a heartbeat, 45 black balls appeared, floating above Dorian's hand. The strain? Energy consciously ran through Dorian's body at an incredible rate. Previously, his comprehension of his Hyperion Beam ability allowed him to activate up to 13 separate Hyperion Beams, all at once. Each Hyperion Beam had enough power to threaten a King-class fighter, especially when imbued with his black flames. Dorian's comprehension was extremely high. The only thing limiting him was the extreme burden that activating the ability placed on him, especially for simultaneous activations. Even with the Soul of Balance and Body of Balance passive abilities his balanced demon form held, activating so many Hyperion Beams was extremely difficult. The One with Nature ability resolved these conflicts. His body was now adapted, able to handle raw energy like it was blood, with very little burden. So little that he was able to activate 45 separate Hyperion Beams, simultaneously infusing each one with his black flames. Thanks to his Jade memory, Dorian could make out vague images of his warping turkey form activating a multitude of Hyperion Beams. While the number of Hyperion Beams Dorian was activating now was less than half that, these Hyperion Beams were also infused with black flames, making each one a rippling orb of raw, burning destruction. You think you can hide from me? Dorian's eyes bled red light as a truly demonic aura rippled around him, his voice rising in volume. Let's see if you can. He clenched his fist. Activate. Roughly half the remaining energy he had in his soul vanished. WHOOSH. The world around Dorian transformed into hell. Black flames, earth-shattering explosions, air whiplashing back and forth, everything became a miasma of death and destruction. Dorian's body was beaten and battered in the chaotic detonation. While the black flames couldn't harm him, and he was able to control the attack to limit the impact to where he was standing, he still was standing at ground zero. Dorian was flung up into the air several hundred meters. He blinked several times, dazed as he looked around. Below him, a huge sphere of black and white fire was expanding, incinerating everything in its path. Multiple shockwaves visibly flew out of this sphere, shaking the air and spreading out. Boom! Boom! Dorian was flung upward twice more as these explosions rang out. His attack seemed to have triggered some sort of defensive or leftover mechanic in what was left of the array networks, making his attack even stronger. Despite the awesome power of the attack, most of it was self-contained within a 100 meters range. Mello and the various demonic council members, if they were still lurking in the nearby area, would likely be fine, though also likely beating a full retreat. Transform. Dorian's thoughts were muddled as a result of the huge impact. As he began to fall back downward, from a height of roughly 1,000 meters, he transformed, catching himself. Whoosh! His sun eagle form came into existence, his body transforming. Dorian moved into a dive bomb as he rushed downward, not wasting any time. Dismiss. The raging black flames all vanished as he let them fade. Keeping so many in existence was incredibly draining, especially when his energy stores were at roughly 20% of their maximum. In just a few moments, he managed to land on the ground. Everything around had become perfectly flat, the stone and rocks melting together to form a smooth surface. The explosion had finished spreading, and not even dust or smoke was left in its wake. Instead, everything seemed pristine. A few hundred meters away, there were clouds of dust and broken stone, but nothing close to Dorian. He returned to his balanced demon form, his senses expanding as he scanned his surroundings. Not a single thing within a few hundred meters could escape his vision. His efforts were rewarded, for, a moment later, a bedraggled, gray figure appeared, collapsing onto the ground just a couple dozen meters away from Dorian. The bleeding form of 15, using his gray manter body. He was shaking from exhaustion and the injuries he'd sustained, a gruesome sword wound visible on his right shoulder. Touching light, Dorian didn't mince words. Whoosh! A blade of light appeared in his right hand. His body blurred as he rushed forward, his every iota of focus zeroing in on 15. He crossed the distance between himself and the anomaly in just a few seconds. 15's eyes glowed as he looked at Dorian. The anomaly was in terrible condition, his body and soul both severely injured. His face twisted as he saw the incoming attack, a shuddering hand raising to point at Dorian. Halt! Whoosh! Dorian froze. He sputtered out loud, shock filling him as he glanced at his arms. Every part of his body seemed to be frozen in space. Arrrrrgh. He roared out loud as he pulled with all his might, trying to take a single step forward. The muscles in his arms bulged, his body shivered as he tried to break past whatever was blocking him. He remained still. Transform. Expand. Dorian's body shifted between a plethora of forms and sizes as he tried to escape and move forward, all to no avail. No matter how big, or how small, he got, he was unable to take a single step forward. Do you think I came here with nothing? 15's voice shuddered into the air as the badly injured anomaly stood up, yellow light still gleaming from his eyes. You may have weakened the array he made, but it isn't destroyed. You may have access to it with part of his soul, but so do I. The injured anomaly began to walk towards Dorian, taking slow, stumbling steps. Maybe not full access, brother, after all, my demonic forms could only get me so far. But I do have this. 15 gave Dorian a bloody smile, bringing out a glowing gray necklace. One that was eye-catching, with several fluttering lights and glowing symbols built into it. The only array key that ever existed. He spat out loud. Dorian watched all of 15's actions, his mind racing ahead of himself as he tried to figure out a way to move, preparing to attack at a moment's notice. He was unable to move or even speak, completely at 15's mercy. This was an array network that was built to seal the Demon Emperor himself. While large portions of it were damaged, its power was extremely focused in the area Dorian was standing at, a dead zone where Dorian was unable to access any of his laws. Space itself was completely locked down, preventing even teleportation. Stripped of the ability to touch any laws, unable to move a single muscle, the situation had taken a dire turn. By now, 15 was standing right in front of him. This is a power left behind by him. A tool I found from the memories he left. As much as I hate using it, you have no chance of stopping it. 15's free hand shot forward, grasping a hold of Dorian's neck. I'm sorry, brother. All I want to do is live, and live freely, not as a slave. The only way that will happen is if you die. He shook his head. You almost killed me. If I had stayed even a second less outside of reality, I would have died. I suppose you can say I survived due to luck. He smiled grimly. But that's what we're known for, isn't it? Our luck. He shrugged. Goodbye, brother. He began to crush Dorian's throat. A power left behind by Ukeli? Dorian's eyes flashed, a grim smile appearing on his face as 15 attacked him. His heart pounded in his chest, his eyes boring into 15 as he stopped breathing. His head felt murky, his entire body restrained and helpless. Fine, we'll do it that way. Determination flooded his veins as he did the only thing he could think of. When he had first arrived in this reality, he had been gifted with a temporary ability. One he could use 3 times. The ability to absorb anything that his soul could bear the strain of absorbing. He had used this power twice already, once to gain a form, and once to save his life. He had saved this third use of the ability, keeping it for a rainy day. It was one of his trump cards, something he would only use if he absolutely had to. Being locked into an array designed to seal an extremely powerful angelic class demon certainly qualified. As 15 held his battered body up by the neck, starting to kill him, Dorian felt a physical connection form. He could, faintly, directly sense 15, as if he had rested a hand of his own on the anomaly's shoulder. He activated this life-saving ability for the third and final time. A power gifted to him by Ukeli, one he could never use again. Absorb. Whoosh. His soul spell matrix flashed, causing his entire soul to shiver. A few symbols that had been carved into it, a temporary ability grafted onto his soul by his creator, glowed and then vanished. What? No. 15 froze, stuttering as he looked at Dorian. You, how? You are, him, only he can do, you have his, how? A moment later, with no fanfare, no great explosions or blasts of energy, 15's body dissipated into dust, killed instantaneously. A huge torrent of energy poured into Dorian's soul, a massive amount of growth points. At the same time, several mental notifications appeared. Grey Mantor bloodline absorbed. Greater Throne demon bloodline absorbed. White Illusion demon bloodline absorbed. Sky Edge Eagle bloodline absorbed. Black Tyrannosaurus bloodline absorbed. Pale-faced lion bloodline absorbed. Sonic Mane wolf bloodline absorbed. Dorian's body fell to the floor. Unlike his previous uses of the absorption ability, he didn't automatically start transforming into 15's form, possibly due to 15 having multiple bloodlines. He instantly got up, pushing aside his exhaustion, his pain, his everything. He didn't have even a second to waste. He forced himself to stand, withdrawing multiple healing pills from his spatial ring as he turned to the north, where the world bridge to Shaptal was located. And then transformed into his Sun Eagle form, his body blurring as he shot forward at maximum speed. He had a vampire to save. Back on Shaptal, the battle in the city of Kractal had reached a crescendo. Up overhead, a series of explosions had shaken the air, blasts of light cascading all about. The locals had long since gone undercover as this occurred, hiding. This scale of clash could only be a battle between experts, powerful king-class ones. Outside the inn Helena was resting in, a fierce battle was still underway. Dorian's army of shades was bravely defending the front line, led by the fearless warrior alchemist Bayron. The third shadow captain Kanto Ren was forced to personally take action, leading to a stalemate. The entire street had long since been deserted. While none of the combatants were aware of who was fighting up overhead, it didn't distract from the ongoing battle below. With neither the city lord nor any of the city guards taking action, everything was allowed to run its natural course. The smell of smoke, burning buildings, and shattered stones stained the air, marring the otherwise beautiful afternoon. The inn Helena was hiding in was badly damaged, with large portions of its roof caving in. Her specific room was entirely untouched, however, fully protected. Inside that room, Helena's body was pale and shivering as she looked outside a window, watching the unfolding battle. She coughed several times, looking small and pitiful as she forced herself to stay awake. Her body desperately wanted to rest and focus on healing, yet the danger she sensed refused to allow her peace. "Where are you?" she muttered, her hands trembling. Abruptly, her eyes widened and she spun around, her heart pounding as she realized something. She was no longer alone. "Hello there, child." A man's voice softly sifted into the air, carrying into her ears as she stared at him. It was a shade, with cool gray eyes and a short gray beard. He wore a set of open purple robes, with several knives strapped to them, exposing his lean, muscular figure. His hands were held folded together and held in front of him as he looked at her, his voice calm. "Who are you?" Helena stuttered out, feeling as if she faintly recognized the shade, as if something about him tugged at her memories. "My birth name was Pharaoh." His eyes were deep, endless founts of darkness, threatening to sweep up the world as he nodded back at Helena. His words were gentle, as was his expression as he looked at her. As he spoke, Helena realized something. She knew who this was. She had seen this particular shade, many years ago. In a duel a long time ago, when the man she knew and loved as a father had suffered a permanent, sinister wound that could never heal. The grand battle that happened dozens of years ago, between High Lord Marcus Aurelius and... "But you probably know me as Hasith Shanti, the Shade King." Helena stared at him, transfixed for a brief instant. A microsecond later, she let out a ferocious growl as she hurled her body at him, her fists taking on a weak glow as she attacked. Back at the site of 15's demise, the smoke and dust had cleared after a few minutes. A few fires still crackled, and the ruins of the Demon Emperor's castle were quite apparent. There was almost no one in sight. Every being, whether living demonic shade, an undead demonic remnant, or a non-living guardian knight, was nowhere to be seen. Almost no one in sight. In that empty wasteland of destruction, a lone figure could be seen, dragging a badly injured body towards the location where 15 had died. Mello coughed several times as he swallowed a light pill, his body slowly regenerating from the injuries he took. He shook his arms and chest out a few times, taking a few tentative steps as he moved onto the smooth, melted stone. After a few seconds of walking, he stopped at a particular spot. "Return." His voice was soft as he held his hand out. Crack, whoosh. The rocky floor cracked and shattered as a small, black dagger shot into the air, landing in Mello's palm. Mello smiled as he saw this, staring at it. "The body-shearing sword broke, but you did not." He was pleased. "Excellent." He tapped on the base of the black dagger, where a small, red jewel was set. This jewel fluttered with light for a moment before shattering. Red liquid flowed out of this shattered jewel, magically floating in midair. This liquid looked as if it was about to fall, the dead zone that covered this area still active. The gray manter's heartblood, enough to absorb a complete bloodline. Mello smiled. "My main goal has been achieved." After a moment, he absorbed the blood, not waiting. Immediately the liquid vanished. After a moment's thought, Mello turned to look at a spot not far from him, at exactly where 15 had died. He walked over to this spot, tapping on the ground lightly. "Come on out. I know you're here." "Well, you can't hear me, but you should be able to feel this." Mello brought out a small shard of metal, cutting his own hand and letting some blood drip. There was a moment's pause as nothing happened. Then, slowly, a small strand of white essence rose from the earth. This strand was pure and condensed, fluctuating with light. If Dorian saw it, he would have recognized it instantly. It looked identical to the remnant soul of Ukeli that was attached to his own soul, unable to be removed. Mello's eyes twinkled as he brought out a small bag. He then physically scooped up this passive, white soul remnant, tucking it away with a smile. "Now then." He clapped his hands together, wiping off any grime and dust he had picked up. "Off to find my main body." Chapter 208 Rescue. Dorian moved through the air incredibly quickly. The moment he managed to get out of the dead zone that locked down the Demon Emperor's castle, his Sun Eagle's body blurred as he drew upon the power of various laws to enhance his strength and speed. The world of Moria had come back to life, all around him. The laws of the universe pulsed powerfully in the air, a rippling return that ran flush with energy. The previously dead trees, plants, and ground were starting to revitalize, strands of life returning. Grass began to flourish, trees truly grew, the air itself seemed to come alive. The demonic remnants that roamed this world retreated, hiding away in the inheritance strongholds or retreating towards the dead zone at the center of Moria. It was a miraculous sight for a world that had been dead for centuries. A sight that Dorian ignored completely as he soared across the world, his mind bearing a singular focus. Save Helena. Dorian made fantastic progress. In just a few minutes, his Sun Eagle form managed to blast all the way from the center of the world to the first world bridge they had originated from. His jade memory had let him memorize the makeup of the world when he saw it while removing the sealing tubes, letting him find it with ease. He happened to pass by several figures on the ground below giving off king-class auras. The members of the demonic council, slowly starting to investigate the aftermath of the battle between 15 and Lord Obelisk. As soon as he reached the world bridge, he immediately flew up it. His body transformed into a blur of golden light as he shot forward, speeding past everything. A journey that took multiple hours by flying ship was cut down to a couple dozen minutes in Dorian's frantic rush, his speedy flight ignoring everything else. He didn't encounter any spatial storms or wild beasts, managing to cross the world bridge in uneventful safety. When he emerged from the world bridge and moved officially back onto Shaptal, his heart dropped. What is happening? Air wheezed in and out of his chest as he flapped his wings, staring. Above the city of Kractal, explosions of light and energy were shaking the air. Dorian could sense huge waves of power lashing back and forth, hundreds and hundreds of meters above the ground. None of the attacks shot downward or damaged the city, but the explosions themselves were horrifying in strength. They also appeared to be gradually rising upward, away from the city. That's at least 2 late king-class experts, and extremely strong ones at that. Maybe even pseudo-angelic. Just from the rippling auras alone that he could feel, Dorian instantly knew he was outclassed. Either one of the 2 beings that were fighting up there was strong enough to wipe him out in his physically exhausted state. If he was operating at full energy, and given a bit of time to gain a better understanding of the law of original sin that he had gained, it might be another story. But the one thing he didn't have right now was time. Dorian dived down towards the ground near the city, his body a blur. He transformed back into his shade form just as he reached the ground, knowing he couldn't exactly show off his transforming abilities in the city itself. Back in his shade form, he sprinted towards the city, moving at top speed. While he ran, he changed into a set of clothes, a white silk shirt and a set of black pants and boots, donning a presentable appearance. His previous outfit had been destroyed back on Moria. This was his backup outfit, one that could stretch or be stored when he shifted forms. In just a few moments, he managed to reach the city gates. They were manned, but no one was currently moving in or out of the city. Instead, everyone was fearfully crouching, watching the explosions above. For a battle of this scale to continue without any of the rulers of Kractal stepping in, it was definitely a major occurrence that no one wanted to be caught up in. Dorian frowned slightly when he saw this. As he ran up to stand in front of the gate, he blinked. He then kicked his feet off the ground, activating one of Euclid's movement techniques to send himself blasting off into the air. He flew up more than 6 meters, easily enough to clear the wall and gate. And hey? Did that person just, what was that? Hold on. Dorian faintly heard some of the guards and onlookers yell out as he soared over them and rushed towards the inner city, ignoring them completely. By the time they fully realized what had happened, his figure had already vanished into the distance. Dorian navigated through the city, using the rooftops to avoid the gaping crowds. Most people had turned out to watch the explosive battle above. Apparently none of the attacks had landed in the city at all, giving people the courage to watch. As he reached the spot where he had left Helena, a horrid look appeared on his face. The entire street her in was on looked to be in ruins. Several buildings were on fire and the paved road had been ripped apart, giant chunks of rock impaling multiple nearby buildings. It was like a war scene. Boom. Whoosh. As he reached this area, he heard a few explosions. There's a battle happening still? His heart pounded, adrenaline pumping in his shade veins as he sprinted forward. In an instant, he found himself looking upon a full-blown battle, situated right in front of Helena's inn. It's my army. Butterflies of happiness exploded in his stomach as he saw the Moria Liberation Force bravely defending Helena's inn. They had managed to protect her. The inn was badly damaged in several parts, but the section that held Helena's room was completely unscathed. Don't think about it, Kanto Ren. As long as I stand, you shall not pass. A wheezing, but powerful voice, echoed in the air, catching Dorian's attention. A bloody, beaten, but brave fighter stood directly front and center defending the inn. This figure was currently engaged in holding off a ferociously powerful-looking shade that was lobbing bolts of darkness and attacking with twisting blades of shadow. The two were closely matched, but the attacking shade was clearly stronger. Both of them had powerful king-class auras, though nowhere near as fierce as the auras up above. Both of them were also somewhat constraining their power, trying to avoid causing massive damage to the city around them. In the defending shade's hand was a rather familiar, enormous cauldron. Warrior alchemist Byron? And he's late king class now? Did he just break through? He recognized the shade, his heart abruptly swelling as he heard the conversation between the two fighters continue. You betray your people for a traitor. The attacking shade was one that Dorian didn't recognize, but a shade that carried himself with a sense of authority. That, combined with his fearsome strength, meant he was clearly someone important. He had a weak chin and a weak-looking appearance that were completely at odds with that, but at his level, appearances were often deceiving. You will die with him. Whoosh. The shade clasped his hands together. Immediately, energy flowed in the air as two giant hammers made of darkness appeared, striking the warrior alchemist directly in the chest. Boom. The impacts knocked into his cauldron before they could reach him. The resulting blow sent Byron back a couple of meters, cracking the earth beneath him. The attacker is a wizard. Is that shadow magic? Darkness magic? Dorian wasn't sure which. I have made my choice, Kanto Ren. I will stand up for what I believe in. That man is no traitor, and you ought to be ashamed for using such vile tactics, targeting his wife of all things. Byron's voice boomed and echoed as he shrugged off the attack. Behind Byron, Dorian made out several other members of the Moria Liberation Force. Several of the captains of the force, including Fabian, were injured and trying to recover, standing guard in front of Helena's inn. A dark, depressing air hovered around them, wavering between hopelessness and hope. He also saw several unknown shades that appeared to be with Kanto Ren, standing opposite the inn. Many of them were injured and recovering as well. The battle between Kanto Ren and Byron had taken center stage, causing the other battles in the street to come to a pause. Everything hinged on that battle. I forgive you for everything, warrior alchemist. His heart blazed with emotion as he saw this. His words are true, foolish lackey of the Southern Duke. Fabian's voice shook the air as he stood up, recovered enough to fight. A king-class aura of might burst around him. You will not touch a hair on her head. Fabian took a few shuddering steps forward, a broken spear trembling in his hands as he held it out in front of him. Dorian took a deep breath. Then and there, he made a promise that no matter what, he would live up to the expectations of Fabian and his Moria Liberation Force. His heart felt incredibly full, gratefulness and pride filling him. Whoosh! Dorian entered the fray. Boom! Thud! He slammed onto the ground between the two parties, his shade body keeping his aura tucked in close. He had so many laws he was drawing upon, including many that were demonic. He felt it a better idea to keep his aura constrained, not letting it emanate freely. The moment he appeared, there was a brief, stunned silence. An instant later, woo! Lord Inigo is back. It's Lord Inigo. Hope-filled yells of adoration filled the air, the murky fearful air that had previously existed vanishing completely as everyone did a complete 180. The downed shades all became ecstatic, several of them forgetting their injuries as they hopped up and down in excitement. Holy High Lord! Tears appeared on Fabian's face as he saw Dorian. The king-class warrior immediately pounded his chest, bowing. We have protected your wife. Dorian nodded at him, maintaining an air of cool and complete power. You did well, Fabian. I will take it from here. Tears streamed down Fabian's face as he heard this response, his body shuddering as he bowed again. He took several steps back and then collapsed to one knee, popping a light pill into his mouth as he nearly fell unconscious from exhaustion and his injuries. The fighter put his full focus into healing, his faith in Dorian absolute. Lord Inigo. The warrior alchemist Byron gave Dorian a pensive nod, his expression slightly troubled. Just as he was about to continue, Dorian held his hand out. Our differences are in the past. Your actions today have gone beyond all measure. You are a brother to me now. He preemptively spoke, meaning every single word that he said. I will take it from here. He repeated himself. The warrior alchemist looked at Dorian for a moment before bowing his head. He took a few steps back and joined the celebrating warriors from the Moria Liberation Force. He wiped a stream of blood from his mouth, taking in medicine of his own as he sat down to heal. Slowly, Dorian turned his attention to the shade known as Kanto Ren. Lord Inigo. The shadow captain stared at the other shade, swallowing slightly. For some odd reason, he felt the faintest hint of nervousness. The way the shade carried himself, his confidence and posture, it felt as if he was facing someone that was in absolute control of the situation without a hint of worry. You are hereby under arrest for violating the... His voice trailed off as he crossed gazes with Dorian. Dorian had taken several steps forward. He gave off no aura, seeming like a rather regular shade. Despite that, his gaze felt colossal to the shadow captain. As he looked into Dorian's eyes, he felt a sensation he had not felt in a long time. Fear. Dorian took several more steps forward, till he was only a couple of meters away. The Southern Duke has determined that your so-called wife is none other than a vile vampire. Kanto Ren found his bravery as he swallowed hard, speaking up. By order of... He cut himself off as Dorian held up a hand. Kanto Ren. Dorian's words were soft, his voice calm. Despite that, a terrible, fierce anger could be sensed, simmering behind those words. The air around him trembled from his presence, energy wanting to burst free and crash about chaotically. Do you believe in fate? A small smile appeared on Dorian's face, a smile that failed to reach his eyes. Huh? Kanto Ren stuttered back, not expecting that question. I have successfully cleansed Moria. The chains that sealed that world are broken, bringing it back to life from the dead. His words took on a certain level of grandeur, informing the entire world of what he did. Behind him, all the celebrating shades grew even more ecstatic as they heard that. However, at the same time, they all grew hushed. Dorian's words carried a strange power in them, one that demanded respect. And yet when I return, I find that you are threatening my wife. My vulnerable, sick, dying love. The air seemed to quiver between Kanto Ren and Dorian, the tension beating almost unbearable. Everyone was staring at Dorian at this point, the shades from both sides paying him complete attention. You don't seem to understand something. Dorian blinked. I am a shade that is beloved by fate. I do not bend to the will of reality. Reality bends to my will. Whoosh. Despite Dorian not releasing even the slightest hint of an aura, Kanto Ren felt a bead of sweat form on his forehead, pressure slamming onto his shoulders. Do you think, Kanto Ren, that if I willed it right now, your heart would stop beating? Dorian's voice took on an odd tone. The third shadow captain's eyes were locked into looking at Dorian, as if he was unable to look away. The shade's heart pounded erratically, his breathing becoming ragged. Through a string of luck or a twist of fate. A series of coincidences that all fall into line, ending with your heart stopping. Dorian's small smile grew a little wider. Do you believe I could do that? He tilted his head slightly to the left, gazing into Kanto Ren with eyes that seemed to pierce into his very soul. I. Kanto Ren stared at Dorian, a look of horror appearing in his eyes. The man's hands twitched, stepping back half a step in fear. In Dorian's eyes, Kanto Ren saw a darkness that he had never seen before. An almighty, all-consuming, deathly darkness that was overwhelming in power, impossible to stop. In that moment, he knew that if he said a single thing wrong, he would die without question. You have a single second. Dorian's voice was cold. Leave. Whoosh. The shadow captain gave up on all pretenses and immediately fled. At the same time, all of his allies booked it, beating a fast retreat. Not a single enemy shade was left remaining by the time Dorian's words finished echoing. With just a few spoken words, Dorian completely ended the fight, forcing a complete and total victory. His claims on reality bowing to his will wouldn't necessarily give away that he was an anomaly, but even if they did, it would only come out later. There were various types of magic and unique dispositions that could cause fate to ripple or twist. His words held a certain level of logic. By the time anyone figured anything out, he would be long gone. A hushed silence lasted for only an instant before the shades went back to celebrating and cheering. Dorian's heart still wasn't steady, however. The battle up overhead was still ongoing, though the explosions were so distant now as to almost be inaudible. With that thought in mind, he raced up towards Helena's room, pushing aside his exhaustion once more, his thoughts only on her safety. Chapter 209 Reason. Dorian moved through the inn in an instant. The entrance was in shatters, as was much of the lobby. Shards of glass, shattered chairs and tables, broken planks, the place was a mess. The patrons of the inn had long since fled, leaving the entryway abandoned. Thud, crunch, wooden boards cracked beneath his feet as he sprinted up a set of stairs at the back. He ran up to the second floor and then down a small hallway till he found the exact room he'd left Helena at. Without hesitation, he threw the door open, a mix of happiness and worry filling his heart. "Helena, are you Al? Who the hell are you?" He abruptly cut himself off, starting. His body was already on edge, his every sense flooding forward. A shade wearing a set of ornate purple robes turned to look at Dorian. The shade was handsome and muscular. He had several throwing knives strapped to the front of his robe. When his eyes collided with Dorian's, Dorian felt as if a huge weight had slammed into him. His mind was sent back reeling, almost stunned from the glance. His heart pounded deep in his chest as he gasped for breath. This person was strong. Overwhelmingly strong, the strongest being he had ever met. Asra. His eyes flashed as he commanded the soul spell matrix genie, conveying his will. Immediately, he received a notification. Species, shade, class, maximum energy level. She can't scan him? This was the first time Dorian had ever encountered a situation like this. Even the pseudo-angelic Excelsior Gaiman had been seen through by Asra. Yet this shade here, it was inconceivable. How powerful is he? His heart was filled with horror. He pushed past that feeling, taking in the rest of the room. Helena was laying down on an ornate bed, resting quietly. The room was mostly the same as it had been before. A few paintings had fallen from the walls and the window was cracked, likely a result of the explosive battle that had taken place outside. What caused his entire body and soul to freeze, however, as he looked around, was what he sensed when he looked at Helena. Dark bruises covered her neck, as if she had been grabbed roughly by the throat. Her clothes were ruffled and damaged, the result of some type of struggle. Her body lay still, her chest did not rise and fall with her breath. Her heart did not beat steadily. It did not seem to beat at all. What did you do to her?" Dorian blinked slowly. The air around him began to quiver, his eyes glued to her body. Reality itself seemed to twist in slightly as he spoke, a deathly aura rising about him. "She's not dead, child. There's no need to go into some sort of insane killing rage. She's only resting." The shade sighed as he spoke, his voice deep and authoritative, preempting Dorian's actions. Dorian blinked and stuttered, the dangerous aura fading slightly at the reply. That was not at all the response he had expected. After a second, he rushed forward, running up to her body and ignoring the ominous shade. For some reason, he got the feeling that the shade didn't mean him harm. "Asra, what's wrong with her?" Out loud, the shade continued to speak. "Her soul has been badly injured. She drew heavily on the laws to attack me, injuring it worse. I sent her into a magically induced coma to restore this damage. I did not mean to harm her. Scanning. Her body has gone into a coma after suffering severe injuries to the soul. A supplemental healing additive has been applied, however, and she is in a stable condition. She should recover awareness in a few days. Her body has also taken moderate physical damage from an abrupt impact." Asra's voice confirmed the man's words. "Why? Who are you? What do you want?" Dorian clenched his fists as he looked up, his hands trembling. It took every inch of his willpower to not leap across the bed and strangle the man for daring to hurt her. "Helena, I'm so sorry. I thought I'd be able to make it back before anything dangerous happened." He mentally berated himself for leaving her here. It wasn't as if he had had any other options, but he felt like he could have thought something up. A dead vampire reaver, one that is beloved by High Lord Marcus Aurelius, is far less useful than a live one. The Shade sighed again, rubbing his forehead. He gave off an aura of morose exhaustion. The Shade took a deep breath. Before Dorian could reply, an aura of raw majesty poured out from the Shade. An awe-defying, heaven-challenging aura exploded forth. One that represented absolute power and might, one that was blindingly powerful, shocking Dorian to his soul. You would be Lord Inigo, yes? The Shade's voice took on a sense of grandeur, like a king looking down upon one of his servants. Despite that, and the shocking aura, Dorian felt strangely unaffected. His only thought was for the danger Helena was in and his rage at this particular Shade for hurting her. Nothing else seemed to matter. Yes, who are you? Dorian replied back, the air around him twisting as he released a stubborn aura of his own. One full of righteous, valorous might, of chaste power, charitable spirit, and a merciful mind. Every single one of the virtuous laws he made use of. The Shade's eyes widened slightly as he sensed this. After a tense moment, he replied, I am Hesith Shanti. His words echoed like rippling explosions in Dorian's ears. The leader of the Shade commune. Your king. The Shade King smiled ever so slightly, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Damn. Dorian blinked, his heart pounding as he realized the enormity of the situation. It was the worst possible scenario. He was facing an angelic-class Shade. Inigo? The Shade King shook his head slowly. Why would you choose a vampire, despite knowing we are at war with them? You must be aware of who she is. She is one of the worst enemies of our kind. The Shade King seemed to want to reason with Dorian. When he heard this, Dorian felt a spark of hope fill him. If this was the case, then getting Helena and himself out of this scenario was a possibility. Your war is not a just one. Dorian spoke from his heart, standing under the pressure given off by the Shade King without trembling. Just because you consider her an enemy does not mean. Before he could finish speaking, he was cut off. You do not understand. The Shade King shook his head again as he broke in with a frown. The aura he gave off felt even more powerful, full of a hint of anger that slammed against Dorian's shoulders, trying to crush him where he stood. I know more than enough. Your way is not in self-defense, you slaughter others to gain territory. Your actions are wrong. Dorian remained steadfast, weathering the aura without a visible hint of strain. You criticize from a position of ignorance, child. Hesith replied slowly. A wise king would not lead his people to their deaths. Dorian returned, moving in front of Helena to shield her from the fluctuating aura the Shade King gave off. Yes, that is right, child. And that is why we must go to war. The Shade King sighed again, rubbing his eyes. Dorian stuttered back slightly, not understanding. You do not understand. The Shade King stated the obvious. Then make me understand. Our kind does not need to wage war. We can find peace. Don't just leave me with questions. Dorian's voice was full of passion. Peace is impossible. The Shade King began but was cut off by Dorian this time. Instead of being angry, he seemed to accept it, allowing Dorian to speak as if he was humoring a child. It is only impossible because you have yet to try. Dorian replied, clenching and unclenching his fists. We have already tried. It is not feasible. Hesith took a few steps away from the window, crossing his arms slowly. It was apparent that he intended to reason with Dorian, likely because of Dorian's status and potential, something Dorian took full advantage of. Then let me try. Just because you did not manage to succeed does not mean I will. He urged, staring the Shade King in the eyes. The weight of the Shade King's gaze was incredibly heavy, one that made Dorian's soul shiver. He held steady under it, however, his body brimming with purpose. You? The Shade replied slowly, tasting the word as if he had never considered it. Am I not worthy? I am a genius Shade, able to kill king-class warriors despite being in the Lord class. A Shade that is beloved by fate. A Shade that just returned from cleansing Moria, a world of death brought back to life. Dorian began to explain himself, pounding on his chest. He meant everything he said. The wars between the vampires and Shades had been horrific, ones that had killed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, over the years. If he could put a stop to it, not only would it save Helena's family from a large amount of grief, but it would also protect her from the dangers she'd face fighting against the Shades. Who else but me? For a single split second, the look on the Shade King's face wavered. Right after, however, he made a decision, his eyes gleaming as he looked at Dorian. You are too weak. You don't have the strength to have an impact on this war. I am not. Not everything depends on woe. Whoosh. Abruptly, Dorian found himself outside the city walls, a few hundred meters distant. He, the Shade King, and Helena had all been transported. Helena's bed had teleported too, moving them away from the inn. She was currently laying down in it, off to the side, several dozen meters away from him. What? He blinked. I locked down the space of that room when you arrived. I warped us away now that I have seen the level of your obstinance. Genuine anger filled the Shade King's voice as he spoke. I value you greatly, and the potential you hold. But you need to wake up from this childish dream of yours. There are some things you simply cannot change, and the fate of the Shade race is immutable, regardless of what you have done on any planet or what exploits you have achieved. His voice shook the air, thundering mightily. The air trembled, a glowing halo appearing on the Shade's head. It is not a dream. Dorian's reply was stunted as the full force of Hasith Shanti's angelic class aura slammed into him. The pressure he felt was absurd. His entire soul seemed to be locked down, sealed into space by a gargantuan weight, as if a mountain was pressing down on him. His body was unable to move, not even a finger. Damn it, shrug it off. Shrug it off, he mentally yelled at himself, drawing upon the various laws he controlled to enhance his soul. Slowly, the burden he felt eased, allowing him to move and free himself. When the Shade King saw this, his eyes widened again, this time in genuine shock. He was not holding back anymore. His full aura had been unleashed. Anyone else that wasn't at least a powerful king-class expert should have fallen unconscious on the spot. A Lord-class being like Lord Inigo should have collapsed long ago. As he came to terms with this, a stiff frown appeared on his face. Your power is still far too weak to have an impact on this war. Resisting my aura is a feat that merits respect, but, he shook his head slowly. Very well, child, I will give you a chance. His hand reached out, grasping hold of one of the daggers that the Shade King had attached to his robe. As he held it, the dagger transformed into a bright blue orb. The moment Dorian caught sight of it, he felt his entire body shudder, an incredible feeling of danger sweeping through him. Space itself seemed to fold in slightly, aimed towards the orb. It was heavy, excessively heavy, and incredibly concentrated. While it was less than half a meter across, in terms of weight, it likely weighed more than several mountains. This is a force orb. I was only able to make this after I achieved the angelic class, the culmination of all of my studies, my effort, and my strength. The Shade King's voice was cool. As he spoke, he took a few steps forward, making sure that Helena was completely out of the way. Block this attack and I will consider your request. Hasith flicked his wrist, without waiting for a response from Dorian. Prove to me you have the power to change the future of the Shade race. Dorian's mind went into overdrive when he heard those words, his eyes boring in on the glowing orb. His heart was pounding, thoughts of protecting Helena filling his heart with absolute faith and courage. Whoosh! The glowing blue orb shot through the air, aimed right at Dorian's chest. It moved with incredible speed and precision, crossing the distance in a split second. As Dorian saw this, he drew upon every law he held. With such a massive conflagration of energy, he wasn't worried about his demonic laws being successfully recognized, even from an angelic class expert. Perfect body, activate, mystic armored body. He activated his strongest abilities, his many passive abilities already running strong. He put every last bit of energy he had into this defense, twisting fate with all of his might as he drew heavily upon his soul, causing reality itself to warp. Everything he had he threw forward, his mind focused on a single thing. Stopping the Shade King's attack. I command you to stop. Chapter 210 Block. The force orb slammed into Dorian's chest like a meteor. The moment it hit Dorian, he was able to sense the gargantuan amount of force behind it. It was not a lie to say that this soul attack was the heaviest blow he had ever taken. However, despite the colossal weight behind the orb, the attack itself felt restrained. Instead of trying to annihilate him, it was more like the orb was slamming into him and knocking him backwards. The Shade King's still holding back so he doesn't accidentally kill me. The fact raced through his mind in an instant, his body straining as his bones creaked. Whoosh! Dorian's legs sank into the ground as he was blown backwards and then continuously shoved away. In just a single second, a 10 meters long gouge in the earth appeared as he was forced back, straining with all his might to stop the attack. Shards of rock, clumps of dirt, and bits of grass were thrown into the air, forming a chaotic cloud of debris. He grunted out loud, his body burning. I can't let it keep pushing me or I'll be overwhelmed. Dorian's arms and legs were bulging, law energy flushing forward to block the attack. The orb blew past everything, through the defensive prowess from his law of gluttony, his attempt at locking down space with the law of envy, his enhanced physique from the law of valor and law of pride, the attack energy from the law of wrath and law of mercy, the defensive power of his mystic armored body. Every single layer he threw up was instantly blasted through with impunity, as if they weren't there at all. Damn, so this is angelic class. Blood spurted from his lips as the insane pressure continued, his arms trembling. The gap between his current level and a true blue, angelic class expert, one of the ultimate peak figures in the 30,000 worlds, was still quite wide. Reality, become imperfect, he grasped hold of the law of original sin, using his rudimentary understanding of it to cause reality to twist in front of him. For a brief moment, a crack appeared in reality, right in front of the force orb. This distortion twisted the air, causing space to fracture. Boom! A small explosion echoed out as the force orb collided with this crack and shivered for an instant. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the force orb was about to shoot off away from Dorian at another angle. A moment later and the crack collapsed, a backlash slamming into Dorian's soul. It felt like a huge hammer had smashed into his mind, a blinding headache forming. Damn, it's too strong. Unlike Leader's arrow, this force orb was the condensed attack of an angelic class expert. Dorian's understanding of the law of original sin was far too low to be able to hold up when he tried to direct it. Even if he tried to twist fate, the cost of stopping or changing an attack like this would be far too large for him to bear. However, the reality shifting managed to slow the force orb slightly. It was still smashing against him like a meteor, blasting him along the ground, but it was also moving slightly slower. I just need to stop it. His arms were blocking the orb, crossed over his chest in an X. As he felt the orb slow slightly, a spurt of hope flared up. Since switching forms was obviously out of the option, Dorian went for plan B. Be shameless. Artifact after artifact zoomed out from his spatial ring, the large store of offensive and defensive artifacts he'd gradually collected flung out one after another. He had always been one to focus on using his own abilities, eschewing most artifact use. As a result, especially after all the treasure he'd gained or enemies he'd defeated, he'd gained quite the store of artifacts that lay dormant in his spatial ring. Magical black flame shields, exploding sword charms, green vine bombs, defensive mire shields. He threw out more than 6 artifacts of various power. Boom! Explosion after explosion rang out as energy ricocheted in the air as a flurry of law energy shook the air. Each treasure he used had power at least at the Lord class level or higher, bringing its own unique twist to the fluctuating power in the air. It was a menagerie of various laws, smashing against the excessively heavy force orb. Dorian's various usages of law energy, as well as his raw strength, had managed to slightly slow the force orb. When this combined with the store of artifacts he practically dumped on the force orb, that effect grew stronger and stronger. Soon, the force orb was only crushing him at 30% its original speed. But it's still not enough. He mentally swore, his eyes bloodshot. His entire body was racked with pain, the seemingly unstoppable blow pushing him farther and farther. This was a blow that even pseudo-angelic experts would be unable to stop, let alone Dorian. Crack. His left arm cracked under the strain, his bones creaking and trembling. In his perfect body state, for a bone to crack was a huge deal. The more injuries he sustained in this state, the harder they would be to heal. Wait, as a wave of pain swept through him, Dorian's consciousness fell on one particular artifact he had yet to use. The artifact that Excelsior Gaiman had given him. He flicked his wrist. Immediately, a small, green stone carving of what looked like a crane standing in front of a small pond appeared. He had never been told what this artifact did, only that it would come in handy. With few options left, Dorian immediately activated the artifact, sending energy from his soul into it to command it to awaken. The moment he did, a flash of cool, green light spread out around him. And the force orb that was slamming into him vanished, freeing Dorian from its incredible pressure. Hundreds of meters above the city of Cractal, Excelsior Gaiman cracked his knuckles lightly, wiping a small dribble of blood away from his lips as he floated in the air. Family General Balbinus is as strong as they say. I'm only his equal in terms of attack power. He might even be a little better than me at that. In defensive prowess, however, I outmatch him. Gaiman admitted the fact to himself, feeling no need to lie. Several dozen meters away, a red-haired vampire in a ripped and torn suit looked back at Gaiman, wielding a long, glowing scythe in his hands. Blood dripped from several large injuries on this warrior, sizzling in the air due to the heavy aura that covered the vampire. This is an exercise in futility, old man. Balbinus's voice echoed in the air, sounding slightly exhausted and harried. The battle between the two had been fantastic, yet seen little in the way of results. The two were at a stalemate. Gaiman simply looked back, waving his hand slightly. Wind began to gather around him, green energy flashing as a protective layer covered him. At that exact moment, as he was preparing to jump back into the battle, Gaiman's eyes widened in surprise. Lord Inigo is using the crane sealing pond artifact I gave him? He blinked as he felt a surge of energy emanate deep in his soul. The crane sealing pond was a special construct that he created himself, an artifact that was linked back to him. As a master of the law of wind, and an extremely powerful fighter, Gaiman had put years of effort into researching various ways to utilize his unique law. One of those was the crane sealing pond. This artifact was special in that it had multiple uses. It could be used to attack, to defend, or to escape. It could only be used once, but which ability it showed depended on what the user needed the most when they activated it. He's using it to defend himself. As he realized this, he braced himself slightly. The crane sealing pond would magically warp any attack Lord Inigo was facing away, absorbing it and redirecting the blow towards Gaiman himself. That was the price of such a powerful and versatile artifact with so many different possible uses. Most of its powers depended on Gaiman itself. Still, Gaiman had no qualms with it. He was a powerful pseudo-angelic class expert, one of the strongest beings in the world. Very few attacks could cause him any trouble. All right, let's see, what do you have for me, Inigo? Thankfully, the attack had come during a lull in the battle between Gaiman and the Aurelius family general. Even if it was an attack from a pseudo-angelic expert, it would be weakened by the crane sealing pond and therefore blockable. Whoosh! Family General Balbinus looked on in surprise as the air in front of the Excelsior shifted and warped with light. Emanations of energy shot out, some type of artifact activating. As he sensed this, he held his scythe up in a tight, guarded formation, ready to defend himself against anything. Back over with Gaiman, a single emotion was currently filling his mind. As that, a sense of sheer horror dominated his heart for an instant. As that one of His Highness's force orbs? His jaw dropped. B-O-M. How? Gaiman's last thought before he was smacked down from the air and cratered into the ground down below, smashed down like someone swatting a fly, was one of pure outrage and confusion. Your Highness, why me? Was that Excelsior Gaiman's crane sealing pond? The Shade King's mouth fell open as he saw his force orb vanish, feeling the connection he had with it sever. It had been transported through space directly, removing any control he had over it. Dorian didn't respond as he fell to one knee, exhaustion slamming into him. He barely had the energy to stay conscious, let alone respond. He took several deep breaths, throwing a light pill in his mouth to help recover some energy. You withstood my force orb, but you relied partially upon outside help. The Shade King looked at Dorian for a long moment. If the Shade had to describe his feelings in a single word, it would be shock. He managed to slow my force orb by a decent amount, despite only being at Lord class. He clearly is using multiple laws, an almost unheard of power, with a soul that far outstrips every Lord class expert in existence. These thoughts raced through Hasseth's head in an instant. My Shade race has finally birthed an incredible genius. He clenched a fist behind his back slightly. If he is allowed to grow safely, let alone beating the vampires, my kind might even gain another angelic class expert. Even Hasith couldn't claim that Dorian's talent would 100% mean he would reach angelic class. But in terms of potential, the Shade King had never met any being with a higher chance. I cannot let him waste that potential. But he clearly is very attached to this vampire. Dozens of thoughts ran through the Shade King's head as his eyes hardened. For the first time, in a very long time, the Shade King did not know what to do. Dorian slowly made it to his feet, his arms and legs trembling. He made eye contact with the Shade King, his spirit unbreakable. Whoosh! The air around Dorian shook as he slowly began to gather energy, able to use just the tiniest amount to prop himself up. As the Shade King saw this, he frowned ever so slightly. No matter his potential, I must put our people first. I cannot sacrifice the security of the Shade race's continued survival. The desecration curse is down to mere years till it activates. The Shade King made his decision. I value you, child, but you are still too weak. Maybe in the future, you would be able to change my mind. But we simply do not have enough time left. He shook his head as he grabbed hold of one more dagger on his robe, holding it in his hand. The dagger shifted and transformed, power condensing around it as a second force orb appeared, identical to the first. The air around the force orb trembled, the sheer concentrated might too much for the nearby area to bear. Just by holding the force orb, the Shade King cracked the earth beneath him. Before Dorian could react, the Shade King threw the orb. Go to sleep, child. Whoosh! Dorian watched it fly at him, his mind feeling delirious. An incredible feeling of helplessness settled upon his shoulders as he saw this, the unfairness of the situation crashing against him. No. He struggled with all his might to draw on energy from around him, all to no avail. The exhaustion that had hit him was deep, not something he could just snap his fingers and recover from. He truly had no way to respond. Before he could think of doing anything else, the force orb arrived. Dorian's eyes snapped shut as he braced himself for the blow, unable to do anything else. Thunk! Boom! Dorian's breath wheezed in and out as he stood still braced for the blow. A loud impact shook the air right in front of him, the force orb slamming into. Not him, huh? He blinked, exhaling in confusion as he opened his eyes. What? The Shade King stuttered out loud as well, his voice full of confusion. When the force orb was merely a couple of meters away from Dorian's chest, something completely unexpected happened. A blindingly pure bolt of white lightning shot down from the sky, smashing into the force orb. This lightning moved almost instantaneously, intercepting the orb and hitting it. That bolt of lightning caused the force orb to freeze in place, its forward momentum coming to a complete stop. My attack was blocked? What? For the first time, the facade of absolute confidence that Hasith Shanti wore cracked. Immediately, his awe-inspiring aura swept forward as the king went on guard, grabbing hold of two of the throwing knives he had attached to his robe. Whoosh! A figure appeared, descending from the sky above. A rather familiar, semi-translucent human waving jovially. Greetings, my fellow shades. Kaladin's voice boomed out loud as he landed on the ground next to Dorian, looking very much like a human and not a shade. A powerful, energized aura surrounded the man as a golden-yellow halo appeared around his head. When Dorian saw that Kaladin had come to his rescue, an indescribable feeling of happiness and gratefulness filled him. An angelic class, soul body? Who are you? Hasith Shanti kept his voice calm and controlled despite his shock, raising his hands as if he was ready to attack. I am the mighty me. Kaladin replied, decidedly unhelpful. Get away, lad, I can only posture a bit, I am much weaker than a full angelic class being. He'll recognize that, and me, before long. A mental message poured into Dorian's mind, magically sent to him from Kaladin. No, I can resolve this. Dorian couldn't respond in the same way, but clenched his fists, taking a step forward as inspiration struck. King Hasith, this is my ally, Bolto, the Lord of Thunder. He spoke out loud, his voice strong and confident. Bolto? Really? That was the best you had? Kaladin's voice whined in his head, a voice Dorian promptly ignored as he continued. If power is what I need to have standing, then surely his presence should suffice, yes. The Shade King stared back at him silently. With this ally at my side, give me a chance. A chance to end this war that you are refusing to end. War? Do you think I want to go to war, child? King Hasith sighed, the aura of morose exhaustion returning around him as he slowly lowered his weapons. He didn't lower his guard, keeping Kaladin in full sight as he continued. Do you think I want to see millions of my fellow shades perish, to see agony and violence spread among our people? He shook his head. I have no choice. We must take Evanen. The existence of our kind depends on it. You do have a choice. Dorian returned, his eyes flashing as he patted on his chest. And that choice is me. You? Hasith blinked slowly and began to shake his head in exasperation. You have a reason to need Evanen, right? Something you must obtain? Dorian had slowly begun to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together as their discussion and fight went on, his jade memory picking up on every tell, every clue, and every piece of information offered. His mind was racing ahead of him as he began to understand. Helena and I, we are a bridge between races. Neither of us wants this war to continue. We can end this, here and now. Dorian slammed his hand against his chest, his words full of passion. Do you think Aurelius would listen to you, child? Hasith replied, his eyes cool. Maybe not to me, but to her. He pointed at Helena, still resting in a magical coma, her soul slowly mending. He loves her as a daughter. I will represent our kind while she represents theirs. Together, we can form a bridge between races and stop this unending violence. We can resolve this issue peacefully. Dorian's words carried a strange persuasiveness in them, aided by his anomaly fate-twisting soul. You just need to give me a chance. The Shade King stared at Dorian, his face emotionless as Dorian's words echoed softly. A long moment passed in silence as he studied Dorian and Kaladin. The echoes of their battle faded away. Everything around them seemed to fall still, an air of peace and tranquility settling. Finally, the silence broke as the Shade King slowly spoke aloud. You have my attention.